We are live. Hello, and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and to our live stream lecture, where we will be, actually, it's a two-parter. It's a live stream lecture followed by a Q&A. We will be doing an hour of lecturing on the topic of the Renaissance. Everybody voted last weekend, and it was a tie between the Ottomans and the Renaissance, so we decided to do back-to-back live streams, one on the topic of the Ottoman Empire, which was a really fun live stream last week, and then another one about the history of the Renaissance, one of the most important artistic, literary, philosophical, and social movements in all of European history. And so I'm going to find a nice, appropriate historical background for discussing the Renaissance. And if you're just joining us for the first time, we do historical content here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel in a friendly, neighborly manner, 24/7, 365 days or 366 days a year. We also, of course, do our live streams every Friday and Saturday. We have a Q&A for an hour, and then Sundays we have our live stream lecture. This weekend we're doing something special as we have a live stream tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern about Martin Luther King. So 2 live stream lectures and 3 hours of Q&A this weekend instead of the usual 2 hours of Q&A and 1 hour of live stream lecture, which is usually followed by a half an hour or so of Q&A anyways. But we've got a really, really fun live stream for you today, 2-hour special. So we're going to be going for a long time, and we hope you really, really enjoy it. And if you like learning about history and social studies, please like and subscribe. And if you are returning to the channel and you're a friendly neighborhood historian, it's great to see you. We welcome you here. We're so glad that you're here. We'll have our moderators putting our social media links in the chat, including our Discord, which we're trying to grow right now so that you can discuss particular historical concepts and topics with me at different times and in different ways. And we would really, really love to see you join us there. Let me see here. Okay, there we go. Just adjusting the lighting a little bit, looking for a nice background so I can't see the chat. But hello, it's great to see you. If you're just joining us now, I want a nice, very appropriate Renaissance background, and the reason I'm pronouncing it Renaissance is because the Renaissance is indeed a French term. It is a French word meaning the rebirth. It is the rebirth of the ancient standards of Greek and Latin culture, literature, art, philosophy, inspiring a new generation of thinkers and leaders like, of course, Niccolo Machiavelli, who we'll talk about later. It inspires art, it inspires literature, it inspires language, the development of language, it inspires culture, it inspires history, and of course it inspires religion. It leads to huge religious changes. The art of the Renaissance is some of the most famous and most beautiful art of all time, and we'll discuss that. And maybe this is perfect. This is, of course, The Last Supper, perhaps the most well-known Renaissance painting of all time is The Last Supper. If it's not The Last Supper, then it's definitely the Mona Lisa, which is one that I was looking for, which I'd also love to share with you as our background today. The Last Supper was the banner that we were using for the live stream, so we had it scheduled ahead of time so that you knew when to join us, 4 p.m. Eastern Sundays. That's when we normally do our live stream lecture, but we have a lot of extra bonus stuff going on this weekend because of the holiday. So let's see here. I'm looking for some other Renaissance stuff that I could put up, a nice background. If I could find the Mona Lisa, that would be fantastic. And maybe better than that is the Sistine Chapel or Michelangelo's David. These are all great examples of Renaissance art, mosaics, sculpture, and everything there that's to enjoy about the Renaissance. Let me see here. Okay. Can't seem to find the Mona Lisa. And we'll be talking about the background, how the Renaissance came to be, what the Renaissance was, its impact, its legacy, and how it changed world history. So there'll be a lot to talk about. You know what? We'll just keep this background of Michelangelo's David for now. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Yes, I checked out your channel, Hars. Yes, that's very rude to interrupt me when I'm in the middle of a live stream lecture. But there are our social media handles that my moderator, Hars, put in the chat. So please follow us there for Patreon, Substack, and Discord. There's also TikTok, where we also have our own our extra bonus content that you won't see here. And of course, my wonderful moderator, Hars, has his own history channel here on YouTube, which I wish you could all go and support. So please go and like and subscribe there after you like and subscribe here, and enjoy the rest of the live stream lecture and the Q&A to follow. So I won't be interacting with the chat as much as I normally do, which I really love interacting with the chat and talking with all of you and answering all of your questions. But I do want to remind you that there is an hour slated for Q&A after the live stream lecture is over. So Hopefully you'll really, really enjoy that. And that will be start about 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As we're getting started, it's 4:05 right now. And so we are going to be talking about the Renaissance. Now, the Renaissance, of course, is a French term. It means rebirth, and it really isn't fully a rebirth in the sense that these ancient Greek and Roman ideas of literature and art and philosophy were dead and then just came out of nowhere in the vacuum of the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages. Western Europe had obviously suffered a huge calamity with the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476, and for the first few centuries afterwards, in the early Middle Ages, had been kind of reassembling itself, developing the kingdoms that would become the basis for the modern European countries. Of course, the Anglo-Saxons settling in England, the Franks becoming the dominant force in France, and eventually the development of the Holy Roman Empire as the powerful force in Germany. You have reconfiguration. So you don't have a lot of, you do have cells and examples of literature and learning and poetry. French chansons are a great example of this, famous lyrical ballads and poems that would usually be sung by bards or minstrels. So the early Middle Ages, you don't see a lot of focus on art and philosophy, except in certain cells and movements like the Carolingian Renaissance or the court of Alfred the Great in England at the end of the 9th century. After that, in what's called the High Middle Ages, you see the rise of scholasticism, which takes the concepts of the Greek philosophers and ancient world thinking about the universe and marries it to Catholic theology. And this is done by important Catholic saints and theologians like Alfred the Great, John Scotus, Anselm of Canterbury, and of course Thomas Aquinas, probably the most important person to ever live in the Middle Ages. Yes, fight me on that. But Aquinas is extremely important in the development of not only Christian theology, but academic understandings of scholasticism and study and education, which becomes extremely important during the scholastic movement. You also have the creation of Gothic cathedrals, so you have revolutions in the art, you have revolutions in philosophy and in education that are kind of these preambles to the Renaissance. But what really causes the Renaissance? Well, there's three major things, in my opinion, that cause the Renaissance. And if you like learning about the history of the Renaissance and the Middle Ages and Europe and history of all over the world, please like and subscribe and become a friendly neighborhood historian. Or you could even become a member like GK is with our own emoji as well as Hars. And that would be really, and for a small fee per month, or just liking and subscribing helps the channel. But welcome, and we're very, very glad that you're here and you're spending your Sunday afternoon with us talking about history in a friendly, neighborly manner. In this case, my hour live stream lecture on the Renaissance, followed by an hour Q&A. So if you have questions about history, we will get to answer them. It'll just be at the very end, around 2 o'clock or so on the West Coast. Yes, grab some popcorn, something hot to drink. I got my coffee here with my famous mug. As I suspected, I was right all along, and please join us. And let me see. I'll just do my football picks right now because I know everyone's talking about them. I still think New England's going to pull it off against Houston. I was watching a little bit of that, and I expect the Bears to hold on against the Rams. So it's going to be an interesting NFC Championship game, Bears and Seahawks, and an interesting AFC Championship game with the Broncos and the Patriots. Something we would have expected 10 years ago with Manning versus Brady, but wouldn't expect recently in the last few years. Thank you for joining us, everybody. It's great to see you. Faraz is a friendly neighborhood historian who's been a subscriber for a long time and is a huge supporter of this channel, so it's great to see you. What happens? There are three causes of the Renaissance, and I think these are pretty historically well established, and if you want to think of other causes to bring up, that could be an interesting topic for discussion during the Q&A. The first major cause of the Renaissance is, in my opinion, the Crusades. Now, this sounds kind of interesting because a lot of people see the Crusades as this backwards kind of thing where the Europeans were savage and did horrible things to Christians, Jews, and Muslims fighting to conquer lands that didn't belong to them. And part of that is true. Now, there were many horrible moments in the Crusades, as there are in any military campaign. But what the Crusades were failed military campaigns to retake the Holy Land from the Muslims by the Christian West. That land had originally belonged to the Christians when the Roman Empire had been Christianized, and then it had been taken back by the Rashidun Caliphate after the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. So the main issue was that the Christians were trying to retake land. They believed their pilgrims were always in danger, and they wanted to help the Byzantine Empire, which was at this point in heavy decline. And so Western Europe sent warriors and soldiers, and the Crusades, the first one was successful. The second through fourth ones are pretty controversial and not very successful at all. And then there was a series of smaller crusades that never really got anywhere, to conquer different Arabic and Muslim lands, as well as to retake Spain. Those were much more successful. And by the way, by the time the Renaissance hits, the Spanish are indeed independent, and that's a huge part of the Renaissance, is the Spanish becoming an empire that builds a huge connection to the New World. And it's a huge way of a spread of Catholicism, Catholic thought, Catholic social teaching, and all of the things that encumbered the Renaissance into the New World as well. So that will have an influence on the development of the New World in Central and South America, just like the English common law and political philosophy will influence the founding fathers in the United States. So the Renaissance is partially caused by the Crusades. Now, why is the Crusades responsible for this? Well, first off, the Crusades are not hugely successful, but the learning and the developments and the scholarship of the Islamic world, which by this time is the stuff of legend after the Islamic Golden Age, where between about the 9th and through the 12th centuries, Islam had been extraordinarily cosmopolitan, extraordinarily eclectic, extraordinarily intellectual. Development had made huge developments in the fields of science, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and things like that. Those learnings, as well as the study of different philosophers and the access to ancient texts in Alexandria and Jerusalem and Antioch and all of these ancient holy places that the Muslims had conquered, had created a robust form of scholarship that had synthesized Islamic theology and ideas with ancient Greek philosophy. And this, of course, will inspire people like Thomas Aquinas, who takes some of his ideas from the Muslim scholar Averroes, as well as the Jewish scholar Maimonides, who worked for the Egyptian Sultan, the king of the Egyptian Muslim state. So these ideas, these concepts, these learnings, these writings become readily available to Christians as they plunder the Middle East and the Holy Land during the Crusades, and will start bringing them back to Europe with them. So these learnings and these ideas will influence scholarship and learning in the university system, and will help spur on Renaissance developments, because philosophy is going to be one of the key parts of the Renaissance. And we'll talk about the different parts of the Renaissance as we go through the lecture. So there's the Crusades, which are extremely influential in gaining access to ancient information, ancient texts, and ancient languages. Of course, that includes Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, the main languages of the Bible. And while the Bible had been translated into Latin and the Vulgate was the standard for the Western Christian Church, the Eastern philosophy, the Eastern writings, and the Eastern religious ideas were more central and closer, of course, in geography and culture to Christ and his disciples. And so this is going to influence the theology of the late Middle Ages, an era where the development of Western Europe far outpaces socially, economically, and politically the development from previous centuries before that. So that's why there's a demarcation that usually happens around the Norman conquest of England in 1066 between the early Middle Ages, which some people would wrongly call the Dark Ages, and the High Middle Ages, when there's actually the robust development of scholarship. This is what we think of when we think of feudal Europe, by the way, with the knights and the lords and the ladies and the castles and all of that. People are usually thinking of the High Middle Ages, although those things existed long before that. And of course, a lecture on the Middle Ages itself would be a lot of fun, and so maybe I'll get to that one day. I don't know if I've ever done one about the Middle Ages themselves, but it's obviously an extremely interesting thing. And what fascinates me most about it is the fact that feudal Japan in the medieval period had the exact same social structure as feudal Europe. Somehow these two entities, far separated from each other, developed very, very similar political and social systems that undergirded their society and economies for centuries at the same time concurrently. The Europeans get out of that a lot sooner because of another cause of the Renaissance, and that's a great transition to the second cause, which is the Black Plague, the Black Death. Now, the Black Plague or the Black Death causes the deaths of 50 million people. I don't know the exact estimates, but it's about a third to a half of Europe's population is killed off. The plague outbreaks have been quite common in Europe for 1,000 years. It's not surprising to people that plagues come. This is a huge pandemic, just like the 536 plague, the Justinian plague had been and of course, it's not only huge in the amount of people that it kills, but much like other pandemics, it changes the way the world works around it. Now, of course, COVID-19 is a very serious disease, and no one wants to get it. But the truth of the matter is that when you look at it, this floored COVID by 100. Plus, of course, you don't have any modern medicine. You have the medieval development of medicine based on Galen, the ancient Roman doctor and physician. which believed in the four humors. Leeches were used to suck up blood because people believed their blood was contaminated. These were all, of course, very unhealthy ways to treat people medically, although sometimes they were lucky enough to work. The four humors, all of that was ancient and archaic, but was still the kind of the gold standard in medieval European science. And by the way, the development of science and medicine and the taking of scholarship from the Islamic world of medicine and scientific scholarship will be extremely important in influencing a huge part of the Renaissance called the Scientific Revolution, which is partially part of the Renaissance and is partially its own thing. So we'll talk about that later. That's part of the lasting legacy and impact of the Renaissance is the development of a better understanding of science and medicine with people like Copernicus, Galileo, and of course Kepler. So so that's the second one. When you have such a huge loss of life in the population, which ravages Europe between about 1447 and 1347 and 1351, you all of a sudden have this huge loss of population. You have the depopulation of cities, and all of a sudden the labor system has been completely overhauled because most of the people who die off are poor people and middle-class workers and artisans and craftsmen who don't have the easy access to quarantine and keep themselves safe from the masses like their European overlords do. Because of this, the social system is completely upended. Feudalism the Black Death or the plague. This plague obviously contributes to not only the loss of life, but to the depopulation of large areas, which means that populations are going to move and migrate. There's going to be an adjustment period for different populations, and all of a sudden the labor that was used by poor people, the labor that was taken for granted, that was given by farmers and serfs and peasants and merchants and artisans is going to gain a lot more value because it's a lot less readily available. This is going to force a shifting in dynamics because the peasants are going to start demanding more and more rights. For centuries, they have been easily exposed to diseases and all sorts of catastrophes and have died at alarming rates and had horrible things happen to them. It seems like the old system really doesn't work that well at protecting them, so they're going to need something that makes it a little bit easier and safer for them. This is going to lean into the development of the end of feudalism, the end of slavery in Europe, at least the enslavement of Europeans as slaves, and to a creation of a social system that is more focused on craftsmanship, development, the building of things, than on necessarily just farming and gathering food. And with serfdom ended, all of a sudden farmers are no longer just bound to the land. They can develop their own businesses and their own enterprise through the development and growth of their crops. So all of a sudden their crops are a commodity. They're in much higher demand because there's a lot less of them because there's far fewer peasants to work the fields. They are no longer bound to the land by a nobleman, and they no longer have this reciprocal relationship with the nobility. However, these ties of classism will continue for centuries onward, where there is a basic idea that the upper class people of Europe, the aristocratic class, along with the noblemen, have something above and beyond in the scope of education, wealth, and management of land and areas, that they are owed fealty and reverence from the lower classes beneath them. But there is a change in social life, and there is a change in social mobility that makes education much more important and also increases the value of the work of the peasant class, where the peasant class is no longer necessarily serfs bound to the land, but are working cogs within a machine of an economic system where you have craftsmen and builders and masons and carpenters who are creating something, usually working in guilds and different organizations to produce these objects, and farmers who are producing something that is extremely important and is not just a guaranteed given over to the nobility. All of a sudden, the old village system, the old feudal system seems to fall apart. Aristocrats remain aristocrats, but they no longer are able to lord over the peasantry their control over them. So people are able to travel more. They're able to develop their own enterprise, especially when it comes. Okay, am I live? Okay, there, good. Sorry about the interruption. So this is extremely important in the development of a social class, of kind of a breaking down of the old feudal system and a development of a new social order that is still bound by relationships and the contractual transactional relationships between the rich and the poor that had existed between what will become known as the landed gentry, for instance, in England, and the working class. But all of a sudden, the working class has especially the peasantry, has far more to say and far more value in what they do because you have such a huge depopulation, yet you still have a need for food and resources. So there's another example of so there's the second cause. So you have huge population shifts, huge shifts in social dynamics caused by the Black Death. You have huge access to learning and scholarship because of the Crusades. And however, the third one is probably the most important one, and this is the 1453 fall of Constantinople. Now, it is true that the Renaissance in many ways was already starting before the fall of Constantinople in 1453, and you could say that the Black Death might be the beginning of the end of the High Middle Ages, and in some ways the beginning of the Renaissance. Renaissance art, because of people like Giotto, was already taking a far more three-dimensional approach towards the way they designed frescoes, paintings, friezes, and sculptures than it had before. Donatello was already doing freestanding sculptures and freestanding nudes, something not seen since the Roman era in the 15th century. Of course, Michelangelo's David is at the beginning of the 16th century, but Michelangelo was already a well-established artist and polymath by the time this happens. Of course, there's also Leonardo da Vinci, who I'll talk about later, but art was already seeing the tinges of the Renaissance getting into its palette in the mid to late 14th century, because all of a sudden you have the development of three-dimensional art when it comes to painting, and a going back and access to information about the way the Greeks would do their sculpture and art that would inspire Donatello, Michelangelo, and Leonardo to create freestanding nudes and things like that, in sculpture work especially. So what happens next? You also have the first freestanding dome built in Florence. We'll talk about Florence and the Italian Renaissance. There are two parts to the Renaissance. There are two geographical locations to the Renaissance. There's the Italian Renaissance and there's the Northern Renaissance, and we will be discussing those very, very shortly. Let me take a break and get a sip of water, and hopefully you're liking and subscribe, or coffee. Hopefully you're liking and subscribing. Let me see here. Okay, we're back. I just had to adjust a couple of things. So, where were we? We've talked about the first part of the Renaissance, which is, of course, the development of, we talked about the causes of the Renaissance, which, of course, includes the development of, sorry, I'm blanking, which includes the causes of the Renaissance, the Black Death, the Crusades and the access to Eastern and Middle Eastern scholarship. And of course, the third cause is indeed the fall of Constantinople when the Ottomans destroy it in 1453. Now, Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire had been on the decline for a long period. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the Crusades would often target fellow Christians, such as with the Fourth Crusade, which basically kicked the Byzantines out of Constantinople for a while and forced their empire to retreat until they were eventually able to retake Constantinople and defeat what was called the Latin Empire, which controlled Istanbul and parts of the Byzantine Empire in Greece during the 13th century. So there was really, really bad relationships between the Byzantine Eastern Orthodox Christians and the Catholic Western Christians, of course, led by the Pope, with the Pope at the head. Church corruption during the 15th century would not help this, And there's a lot of issues that will, of course, be addressed religiously during the Renaissance. And a lot of people see the Renaissance as a breaking away from religious patterns, and a lot of people turning on religion and starting to become anti-religious or irreligious, but I don't believe that's actually true. The Renaissance, despite its many different phases, is indeed a religious movement. And I think that you can look at the art, you can look at the culture, you can look at the writings, and you can understand the heavy influence of religion and religious development in this time period. And of course, the Renaissance will also influence the growth of the Protestant Reformation. So there's a lot to say there. So the fall of Constantinople does several things. First off, it forces the Europeans to basically give up on any notion of retaking the Holy Land. It also destroys the Byzantine Empire and sends many of the Byzantine scholars and philosophers from Greece, who of course Greece is a hub of philosophy and always has been, to retreat back into Western Europe. This sending them back into Western Europe gives access to Byzantine archives, Byzantine ideas, and Byzantine philosophy, which will influence Renaissance learning and scholarship very much the same way that the Crusades, in accessing Middle Eastern scholarship, had predisposed Europe to different philosophical, religious, and mathematical and educational ideas that would be influential in the development of not just scholasticism, but the Renaissance itself. So you have the Crusades, you have the Black Death, and of course you also have the destruction of Constantinople and the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453, because now all of a sudden the Europeans are going to look elsewhere for access to trade routes, because now the Muslims control all of the Eastern Mediterranean. Of course, they also control the Bosporus, and they control access to Black Sea ports. The Europeans, some of them will play ball with the Ottomans, such as the Venetians, who will be very, very good at this for a very, very long time. But the truth of the matter, as my background, by the way, is, of course, the Last Supper with Jesus and his apostles. And this is, of course, a Renaissance work created by Leonardo da Vinci and becoming one of the greatest examples of a long, laid-out plate of artwork in human history, a landscape, which obviously will be portraits, landscapes, secular and religious painting and iconography will be extremely important during the Renaissance as well. So again, a lot of the most famous paintings of all time, a lot of the most famous artworks of all time, a lot of the most famous sculptures of all time, and some of the most famous buildings of all time are designed and built during the Renaissance and are an example of Renaissance art and architecture. And the rebirth, which is where the Renaissance gets its name from, obviously a French word, is based on the rebirth of ancient Greek ideas, ancient Greco-Roman ideas of architecture, art, religion, philosophy, and science, starting to influence the development of European culture. Now, the development of European culture socially, due to the Black Death and the changes in social expectations, contractual relationships, the hierarchy of the feudal structure breaking down, also influences the development of a new, not only a new social and economic hierarchy in Europe, but also a new understanding of individuality and of common language. And this will be extremely important for Renaissance scholarship. Individualism is not a concept that is known to the Europeans. Individualism, which is so predominant in the West for so many people, and of course in the United States especially, is not something that Europeans in Christendom in the late 14th and 15th centuries are really thinking about. However, if we're really going to look at where the Renaissance gets going, and really going to look at where the Renaissance begins, it begins in Italy. And that is where many of the ideas of not really individuality, but the study and focus on the human soul and creature, which is called humanism, are extremely important, develop. The three major cities of Italy at this time that are important in the development of the Renaissance, actually there's four, are Rome, Milan, Florence, and of course, Venice. Venice is one of the richest areas in Europe at this time. Italy is not a united country. There are various city-states ruled by various different important families that are extremely influential in the development of economies. The Medicis are the extremely influential family in Florence, who will be extremely important and influential in the development of not just Renaissance art, architecture, and philosophy, becoming patrons of those arts, but also in developing a banking class. Now, banking in Europe had already existed and had already had different issues with it in the past. The Medicis basically developed the basic modern idea of banking with investments and interest that had already kind of been practiced in the Islamic world and by Jewish bankers before, but basically creating the bank as a financial institution for loans, investment, and interest in a European context is really capitalized on by the Medici family, who rule basically Florence as their own little country their own city-state during the 15th and into the 16th centuries. The Medici, such as Cosmo and Lorenzo de' Medici and others, will be extremely influential, not just economically in the development of modern banking, but philosophically and artistically, with patronizing the arts, as well as developing a political connections which will lead into the 16th century, with figures like Catherine de' Medici being extremely important. The wealth and power of the Medicis, as well as the Borgias in other parts of Italy, will be the stuff of legend. These are very, very powerful families that work very, very hard to hold on to their power in their various city-states. Now, not only are they interested in the development of scholarship, but they are also interested in the development of finances. They're interested in the development of scholarship and of art. And this leads to the patronage system that is extraordinarily common when discussing the Italian Renaissance. The Italian Renaissance comes first, so we're going to discuss it. The patronage system is how Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael Buono, and Michelangelo Buonarroti, and Raphael, and all the other great masters of the Italian Renaissance, and many of the other parts of the Renaissance are going to get their way. This is also important for political philosophers of the time, like, of course, Niccolò Machiavelli. The patronage system is a way in which extremely wealthy patrons, people like the Medici family who have the money to spare through their banking empire, are able to fund different art and learning projects in the city of Florence. And Florence becomes the hub of the early part of the Renaissance. This is why Buono is able to build his, Brunetti, I think is his name. He's able to build the first freestanding dome since the Pantheon, which was built since the Roman period. Basically, the access to Greek and Roman learning that had come from the Byzantines and from the Middle East, and from the changes in the social apparatus, which allowed people to become more educated, and of course the university system created during the High Middle Ages had created extremely important centers of learning in Bologna, and in Paris, and in Cologne, and in other areas throughout Europe. All of these things kind of mixed together in a melting pot to become the basis for scholarship, becoming a renewed interest in the scholarship of the ancient philosophy, ideas, and languages. These scholars are also very interested in the development of their own language, and two of the best examples of this, and two of the early kickstarters of the vernacular movement in the Renaissance are Dante Alighieri and Petrarch. Dante Alighieri is in prison when he writes the Divine Comedy in the late 14th century. In many ways, just like Giotto in the artistic world, he is a forebearer of the Renaissance in the scholarly world by not only writing this incredible epic poem, obviously heavily influenced by the Greco-Roman epic poems like the Aeneid, the Iliad, and the Odyssey. Literally, Virgil is the guy who guides Dante through hell and purgatorio before he gets to heaven. Which is, of course, the ancient Roman poet who wrote the Aeneid as a way to connect the Romans to the ancient Trojans. The people like Petrarch and Alighieri set the mood of the Renaissance by not writing in Latin, the language of the church and the predominant lingua franca of Western Europe, especially those who could read, if you could read and write, which was not many people. It was usually reserved for the church, for scholars, for people who worked in the king's courts, and sometimes for noblemen and kings themselves. But Dante Alighieri was, in writing the Divine Comedy, steps forward and makes not only a huge development in creating an epic poem on the level of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, but also writes it in his own language, not choosing Latin or Greek or Hebrew, any of these biblical languages that are extremely popular with the church. And of course, the Divine Comedy is a theological work which includes many condemnations of the growing corruption within the Catholic Church of the 14th and 15th centuries. So basically, Alighieri goes through this journey where he goes from hell to purgatory and back to and eventually lands in heaven, or paradiso. And of course, this is all written in Italy. It includes his companion and guide being Virgil, and it's a huge, groundbreaking, revolutionary work written by a man in prison who doesn't necessarily have a patron like the Medicis to fund him, but because of his brilliance, his ability to master the language, write beautiful poetry, and connect the world back to the ancient writings of the Greeks and the Roman poets, is a groundbreaking work. Now, Petrarch is known for the creation of the sonnet. Now, the sonnets of Petrarch are some of the most famous in the world. He's in love with the wife of a knight who he can't marry because he's a churchman, but like many churchmen, he's able to read and write, so he's able to express his love for this woman. I forget her name. Is it Lucretia or Florencia or something like that? And Petrarch is I think he's from Florence, and he's writing in the late 14th century as well. So you have You have Dante Alighieri, you have Petrarch, you have the development of the Italian language in these different poems that are written. One an epic poem and one a series of sonnets, which will be extremely influential in the development of writing and books and and literature during the Renaissance. So these are, again, kind of the forebearers to the Renaissance. I've already mentioned the causes, but now I've mentioned the forebearers. I've mentioned the causes of the Renaissance in that you have wealthy people who are willing to basically fund the development of Greco-Roman art and architecture and writings that are similar to the ancient Greeks and Romans in that they have philosophical, religious, mythological connections. And of course, this is where the Medicis, the Borgias, and other families in Italy will step in to basically be major patrons of the arts for people like Niccolo Machiavelli, who will write The Prince in 1515, basing it off of the Lorenzo de' Medici. Now, Niccolo Machiavelli is one of the most interesting people in all of history, and he develops probably the first major European political philosophy since, of course, the Romans themselves. His political philosophy is often compared and contrasted with Aristotle, in which Machiavelli, basically taking from the inspiration from the writings of different historical figures and historians like Livy in his own commentary on Livy, will basically say that the point of rulership, the point of government, is to control the masses and to get what you want out of them. A ruler sometimes needs to resort to cruel and often difficult measures. Desperate times calls for desperate measures, and the ends often justify the means. Now, Machiavelli, contrary to a lot of people's thoughts, isn't just a political philosopher. He is a military tactician, and he doesn't just believe in killing anyone who disagrees with you. He believes that leaders, by subtle manipulation and also political savvy, as well as the ability to control their military and issue whatever demands they want, can get what they want done. That is a huge part of his philosophy. I'm not answering questions right now. I will answer questions later on, but would be happy to talk about that stuff later. Somebody mentioned Pope Adrian IV. There is also the Borgias are extremely influential in art themselves. Cesar Borgia is an inspiration for the painting of Albrecht Dürer, I believe it's Dürer, who crafts, in many people's minds, the Renaissance image of Jesus, the blonde-haired or dark-haired man, European man in European clothes with blue or although Jesus is usually given, now this is one of the reasons you've probably seen Jesus looking very European in many of the paintings about him, but Jesus is usually given what they believe to be ancient Hebrew garments. People around him may be dressed or look very European indeed. And the main reason for this is because sometimes the European painters would want to contextualize biblical stories and accounts in their own world, but also would pay homage to their patrons. Maybe their patron is not Jesus. They would not want to make their patron have the face of Jesus, but maybe he's the centurion at the cross who acknowledges Jesus as the Son of God. Maybe the enemy of your patron is Judas, or maybe your patron is St. John lying on the breast of Christ at the Last Supper. Many people believe that Leonardo da Vinci took one of his young lovers and put his face on the face of John. So Renaissance artists were very keenly aware of the influence of religious art and would often, to please their patrons, put their patrons' faces or their cities or their businesses or their family members patched onto the faces of famous people from mythology or from the Bible. Now, not all of the art during the Renaissance is biblical in nature. For instance, of course, there's sometimes a synthesis between ancient mythological influences as well as religious and biblical ones. Now, take, for instance, Michelangelo's David, perhaps the most famous freestanding nude in sculpture in all of human history. What makes this such a fascinating thing, what makes Michelangelo's David such a fascinating sculpture is that it is not just about the ancient biblical figure who's about to kill Goliath. It is also extraordinarily homoerotic and is completely based on Apollo. So you have a synthesis of the biblical character of David in a beautiful, virtuous pose, considering what to do in order to fight Goliath. This is supposed to be David as he's gathering stones in the ancient biblical story. And he is also very much akin to the god Apollo. So this is a way that they would pay homage to the Greco-Roman world as well as the biblical world, the biblical theology and stories that undergirded their entire society. And this was common for Michelangelo, Leonardo, and all the other Renaissance masters and artists. So I'm not in a hot air balloon, but thank you very much for thinking so. So that's what makes, obviously, this is put in Florence in 1506, Michelangelo's David such an incredible artwork. But it is not the first sculpture of David. Donatello's David is about 50 years before that. So already in the 15th century, you have a patronage system where wealthy Italian families would be paying artists, usually sculptors and later on portrait painters, to depict and paint and build depictions of biblical figures and pay homage to them. These paintings would often be put in their homes or presented at parties or festivals or different feast days and honoring the different saints of the Bible. So this is where the bulk of European portraiture, paintings, and sculpture during the Renaissance comes from. It comes from the patronage system, but it also comes from easier access and understanding of ancient Greco-Roman ideas and mythology synthesized with Christian theology and the access to learning. You also are seeing this coincide with the development of Italian culture in Florence, Venice, and Milan, which all become extraordinarily wealthy centers of learning. The Renaissance art, the architecture also influences the buildings. Like, for instance, this is Rome. And many of the buildings, as you see, have this kind of square, rectangular space towards them. You see the roofs have similar patterns to them and similar archways. This is all Renaissance-influenced architecture that is extraordinarily popular. And if you wonder what this is, actually, this is St. Peter's Basilica. This is the Vatican. This is the center of the Christian religion, especially at that time. So this is Rome. And you can, of course, see modern buildings and other things like that. But if you want to, you can really pay attention to the fact that you have different buildings with different styles, but most of it is actually based on Renaissance. Window frames, roofing, the texture, the rectangular patterns. All of this is very much influenced by the Renaissance and by the ancient Greco-Romans. So there's a revived interest in ancient Greco-Roman art, architecture, philosophy, but now the writings of these philosophers who are synthesizing their own political experiences with that of the Greeks and the Romans, like Niccolò Machiavelli, are not written in Latin, they're written in the language of the people. This is where the vernacular movement is so important. So you have the patronage movement, you have the revival of ancient Greco-Roman thought and art, and you also have this system of patronage and you also have this idea of the vernacular, the language of the people, actually being extremely important. When the Vulgate Bible had originally been translated by St. Jerome, it had garnered a lot of criticism from the church at the time because it was considered vulgar. Not inappropriate, but just in the language of the masses. However, the masses didn't read or write. Now, because of the social changes, many of which were caused by the Black Death, you have an access to education and learning that you haven't seen before. And because you have that access to education and learning you haven't seen before, you have more people reading and writing, not just in churches and monasteries where the educated are, but throughout the entirety of Europe, particularly for the aristocratic class, who is now much more interested in education and in learning famed stories of mythology and the Bible than they were in centuries past. These people are now much more interested in learning and writing and reading in their own languages. So you have a much more literate class. Now, of course, technology influences every single philosophical, political movement, artistic movement in history. And the Gutenberg press being invented in 1447 is obviously absolutely huge because all of a sudden works don't just take a long time to be copied and collated. Bibles in the medieval period took about a year to be printed and cost about a year's salary, which makes a lot of sense. However, by the time you get to the Gutenberg press, which of course the first thing that Johannes Gutenberg printed was a Bible off of that in 1447, now you all of a sudden have the ability to mass produce written works. So not only are you able to mass produce the works of the Bible and the saints, you are also able to mass produce the works of mythology, antiquity, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the works of Ovid, Horace, Virgil, and of course Petrarch and Dante, and later on, of course, Milton and Shakespeare. These work, and of course the writings of the Reformation will survive, and the Reformation itself will survive because the printing press has given people easy access to be able to access. It makes it easier to copy and access documents and writings, books, tracts, and all sorts of things from both the ancient and the more modern and the more contemporary world of the time. So So there is a lot going on in technology that makes it a lot more easy to access printed material. It makes printed material cheaper, and gives more incentive for people to learn to read and write at an earlier age. Now, the peasantry and many people still remain very, very illiterate, but people in the middle and upper classes now all of a sudden, because of the social changes and because of the social demands of their time, see the opportunity to develop wealth, to create patronage relationships with artists and writers, and also to have works disseminated and to read them. So things are very, very different at the beginning of 1500 than they were at the beginning of 1400, because all of a sudden you have easy access to printed materials that can be produced very, very, very quickly. I'm not answering questions right now. So this is in many ways what the computer has done in the digitalization of information, and where you can read ancient books online in PDF form in just 5 minutes. The access is okay, we're back. So the access was absolutely huge in the European. The access to printed materials is hugely different in the beginning of the 1500s than it was in the 1400s. And now more and more people see the need to learn to read and write, and more people, not just in the religious world but in the secular world as well, see the need to read and write. Now let's get back to the major philosophy of the Renaissance, which is called humanism. Humanism is the basic idea that the study of human beings is not evil. Human beings are not evil and terrible creatures that are just completely maligned by sin, as some people believed based off of the scriptures, but that human beings actually are impressive creatures, the height of God's creation, and need to be studied. And it is actually a way to honor God by studying the humans that he created. So again, a lot of people think of humanism today, and they think of secular humanism, and they think of these movements as non-religious. This was a totally religious, scholarly movement. It was based on a desire to honor and worship God. This isn't me trying to be religious or muddle the message with religion. This is me simply saying something about the political and the climate of the time. And a lot of people have looked at the Renaissance as the beginning of the end of religion in Europe, but in many ways it's not. It's just a change in development in their understanding of religion based off of access to new materials and a changing social world around them, again, based off of those three causes. The fall of Constantinople, giving them access to Byzantine learning and ideas, which also gave Europe, by the way, this idea of us versus them, that the Christians in the West needed to survive and thrive to defeat the Muslims in the East, and that there is now no longer the alliance in the East, that the Eastern world, and it also spurs on exploration and the development of technology that will hurry them to move westward and other places in order to colonize different areas and to trade in order to access the riches of the Orient, like India, China, and Japan. This will, of course, send the Europeans on all sorts of explorations. So the age of exploration is also caused by the fall of Constantinople, which also, of course, involves the technological and intellectual and scholarly developments of the Renaissance. So they're all interconnected. The age of exploration and the settlement of the Americas does not happen without the advent of the Renaissance, which brings about the new technology necessary for the Europeans to do all of this colonization and imperialism, but it also is carried on by the Ottomans taking over the Byzantine Empire and it becoming that much more difficult and frustrating for Europeans to access the Silk Road and trade. So the desire for trade will spur on technological growth and development, which will spur on exploration, which is all part of the Renaissance as well. Christopher Columbus is very much a man of the Renaissance. Of course, the challenge is to religious authority and the study of the human person through humanism, with the whole desire of understanding man's relationship to himself, to his society, and to God, will influence the Protestant Reformation, which has a much more individualistic approach to Christian faith than the communal idea of late medieval Catholicism. Late medieval Catholicism and the church seem to be very corrupted. The Borgia popes are around at this time, Alexander VI and folks like that. So the Catholic Church is seen as a very corrupt and difficult institution, bureaucratic, intractable, stuck in its ways, and needing desperate reform. And reforms are called, and the church is often mocked. Alighieri is one of the first ones to do it. Boccaccio is one of the other ones in the Decameron. Geoffrey Chaucer does it in the Canterbury Tales, which is also a Renaissance work if you want to think about it in the fact that it's a Middle English work. It's not written in Latin, at least I don't think it was. And of course, you also have the criticisms of Desiderius Erasmus, the famous Dutch scholar, which will bring us to the Northern Renaissance in a second, and later on Martin Luther, who is another product of the Northern Renaissance. So the Renaissance does allow for the criticism of the Catholic Church and for the criticism of corruption within the Church, but it also leads to calls for reform and for evangelization of the new world that was discovered, all because of the Age of Exploration, which was spurred on by the fall of Constantinople and the rise of Renaissance thinking and technological developments. Again, I know that's a lot in one sentence, but these are all just a fancy way of saying it's all connected, it's all together. Now, in order to actually get to the Q&A portion, this lecture could go for 2 hours because there's just so much to talk about with the Renaissance. I've talked about the art, I've talked about the architecture, I've talked about the focus on humans. Of course, if you look at Michelangelo's David, and you look at the writings of Machiavelli, and you look at so many of these things, or the Sistine Chapel, which obviously has this very famous painting of God reaching out to touch, which is, by the way, an example of patronage. Pope Julius is the patron of Michelangelo and has him paint the Sistine Chapel. And of course, one of the most famous historical books and movies is The Agony and the Ecstasy, very underrated, very interesting, obviously a little bit of historical fiction there, but Pope Julius II fighting with Michelangelo in order to get him to paint the Sistine Chapel, and you have God reaching out to touch Adam. That's a very humanistic idea, and of course, these are some of the most beautiful paintings in all of the world. So you do have, in many ways, and by the way, St. Peter's Basilica, the Sistine Chapel, the Vatican, that's all designed and architecturally built up, as well as all of this area surrounding it that is now known as Vatican City, during the Renaissance. These are all Renaissance productions. Renaissance architecture is Greco-Roman influence. That's why you have the freestanding dome in Florence that's built by Buonarroti, I think is his name, and that is a reanimation and is completely inspired by the Pantheon built by Hadrian. So all of a sudden, the ancient Greco-Roman architecture, art, and philosophy is influencing the Europeans, but they are also putting their own spin on it, studying humans and writing in their own vernacular languages, seeking to do what Jerome did in translating the Bible and other texts into the languages of the people, because more and more people are able to read and are able to access these readings. So you do see, even before Luther starts his famous German translation of the Bible, you do see efforts by the church to start translating the Bible into the languages of the people. Now, this had come with a huge problem against Lollardy. Lollardy was a proto-Protestant reformative effort in England in the 14th and 15th centuries that had been crushed heavily by the church and the king and the kings of the time during the Lancastrian dynasty. But Lollardy was basically this idea, influenced by a man named John Wycliffe, that the Bible deserved to be in the hands of the people and it deserved to be translated properly into the language of the people. And of course, the church was too corrupt to ever care about this or do anything about it, so Wycliffe had already started working on his own translation. The church had banned translations of the Bible because they hadn't been able to review this and had heavily persecuted the Lollards, considering them to be heretics, just like they had other heretical Christian groups like the Albigensians and the Waldensians in actually launching crusades in the south of France against them in the 12th and 13th centuries. I know that's, again, a lot, but basically the Catholic Church wasn't very keen on the idea of people getting their own private interpretations and translations of the Bible during this time, which sounds horrifying to us Americans in our individualistic system, but the development of that individualistic system is rooted in the Renaissance, in humanism, and in the development of studying the human self, which of course is a production partially done by people of the Church. These people are not secularists. This is not secular humanism. This is in many ways a form of religious humanism that is popular in the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, the scientific revolution and the Reformation are all, I've done a lecture on the Reformation. I should do one on the scientific revolution. They are indeed worthy of their own live stream lectures, but they are indeed also offshoots or even compartments of the Renaissance. Martin Luther is extremely interested in studying the vernacular language and getting the Bible properly translated into German, which he does while he is in exile, hiding from the church, which is seeking to kill him. Or should I rather say, to be a little bit more fair, the Holy Roman Emperor, who is seeking to kill him. By the way, the Holy Roman Emperor, this is also the time where the Habsburg family becomes the most powerful family in Europe. Looking at the political and military, this is the time of Henry VIII and the rise of the Tudors. England is kicked out of France in 1453 thanks to Joan of Arc and Charles VII. And then basically after that, the English are going to turn their own attention to dominating their own island, the British Isles, as well as going outward to trade and develop their navy. Henry VIII will create the British Navy, which will become the stuff of legend. Elizabeth I will have her own renaissance going on with the development of William Shakespeare and John Donne and Christopher Marlowe and people like this in the late 16th century. So the Elizabethan part of the Renaissance is going on. That's also when England firmly becomes a Protestant country, rebelling from the Catholic Church. You have, of course, Henry VIII, the rise of the Tudors. The end of English occupation in France will lead to a civil war between the Lancaster and York families, who will both vie for the English throne, and eventually the Tudors will be the ones who come out victorious, with Henry VII coming to power in 1485. At the same time, and his son Henry VIII will be, of course, one of the most notorious monarchs in all of European history, but he is very much a man of the Renaissance. He is a writer, he is a philosopher, he loves to write poetry and sing and things like that, and so he's going to be extraordinarily influential. And of course, he will also break with the Catholic Church because of his own humanistic idea, where he believes he should be able to get a divorce for the reason that he doesn't want to be married to his wife anymore because she will not bear him a male heir. The French have their own counterpart to Henry VIII named Francis I at this time, by the way, who is the king who builds the Louvre. Yes, the Louvre was originally a palace for King Francis I of France. And the Louvre, although it's a museum, take away the pyramid, the very controversial pyramid that's outside of it, is indeed a building of a Renaissance, as are so many different palaces like Windsor Castle, which was built by Thomas Wolsey, is it Windsor? I think it's Windsor, that's built by Wolsey and given to King Henry VIII in England. The Habsburgs take over, Maximilian I takes over Spain. His son Charles V will rule over the Spanish while they start to build an empire in the New World, as well as, of course, the Holy Roman Empire, and he will be the one who tries to chase down and kill Martin Luther and kick him out of the church. Luther's ideas are based on Renaissance reinterpretation of individualism and humanism being the best way to understand man's relationship to God, that it is up to the individual's interpretation of the scripture to actually make the difference. And this is, again, part of what I've been kind of beating around the bush about, but the second part of the Renaissance, which is, of course, the Northern Renaissance. The Northern Renaissance is where we see the landscape portraiture of the Dutch, who kind of catch up after they gain independence from the Spanish in the 16th and 17th centuries. They will build a huge mercantile empire, but this is where some of their paintings like Vermeer and Pieter Bruegel, this is also the paintings of Hans Holbein and Peter Paul Rubens, which are religious but sometimes secular. And there seems to be more and more interest in painting mythological and secular depictions to kind of focus on that humanism, to focus on individuals in not just their religious lives and context, but in their daily lives. So this is where you get paintings like The Girl with the Pearl Earring. That is a very humanist painting. It's focused on an individual and her relationship. The idea of portraits of rich people paying artists to paint them was totally unthinkable in the 1300s and mainly throughout the 1400s. But by the 15 and 1600s, it's common parlance in most of Europe. So the Northern Renaissance is far more humanistic, and it'll be far more influenced by the Protestant Reformation, as the Dutch became one of the premier leading Calvinistic societies of the 16th and 17th centuries. So the Renaissance stretches into the 17th century because of the influence of the religious movement, of course, which becomes known as the Protestant Reformation. Again, I'm just trying to get all of this together because it's a lot. But basically, the Northern Renaissance is less close to the church and is far more focused on the humanistic aspect, especially in its art. But you also have philosophers and writers who question the issues of society, men like Thomas More in his writing of Utopia, which kind of envisions a proto-communist society. You also have Desiderius Erasmus, who's extraordinarily critical of the church and its corruption, and is also one of the most well-known humanist scholars and thinkers of the time, whose translations of the ancient sources ad fontes, which is a huge part of the Renaissance. Not just writing in your own vernacular language, but also not just buying the Latin translations of the Bible or other ancient texts, but going ad fontes, to the sources, reading the ancient sources in the languages that you have, because now, thanks to the Crusades and the Byzantine scholarship, you have access to the original sources written in Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and all of these ancient languages that are very beautiful and very complex, and you have the ability, and the church has the ability to teach you them, and you have the ability to analyze them. And as Erasmus, who's not just a scholar but a priest, is very, very interested in studying them, and he eventually renders a translation of most of the New Testament that becomes the basis for the King James Bible. It's called the Textus Receptus, or the received text. So you have, in scholarship and writing, you have writing in the vernacular, the mass production of tracts, writings, books, ancient and modern. You also are contemporary, I should say. And you also have the idea of studying and writing with the ancient sources and getting access to them. and that is the Ad Fontes movement is huge, first in Italy and then in the northern parts of Europe, like England and, of course, the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands has its own artistic movement, but, of course, you have the English, you have Henry VIII, you have Mary I trying to bring him back to Catholicism, and, of course, you have the Elizabeth. And I've done live stream lectures on all of these figures. They are fascinating people. Check out my English monarch series. And, Harz, can you put my English monarch tier ranking system video in the chat, so everyone can go check out who I think is the greatest who are the greatest and the worst of the English monarchs. So the Norman Renaissance is its own animal, but it is not independent of the humanism and scholarship that highly influences and guides the Southern or Italian Renaissance. Of course, the Italian Renaissance is probably the more famous one, and when you think of the Renaissance, you're thinking of Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and who's the other one? Raphael. Yes, indeed. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are named after Renaissance painters. Raphael, by the way, is one of the biggest religious painters of that time and is actually probably my favorite Renaissance artist. I mean, his Madonna and Child is absolutely beautiful. Piet's depictions of Mary holding Jesus when he comes down from the cross, Madonna and Child, these all become huge at this time. Absolutely huge. Excuse me. While I take a break to sip on some coffee, hopefully you can double tap and like and subscribe. Thanks for your support and your love. It means a lot to the channel. A super chat always helps, as well as becoming a member. It's as easy as that. So the Catholic Church is probably the one that takes the biggest hit from the Renaissance, which is kind of an ironic thing in some ways when you think, I'm just talking about its legacy. When you think about the fact that the Catholic Church itself is the one who spurred on much of the learning and scholarship and architecture and was one of the biggest patrons of the arts and architecture of the Renaissance itself. The development of Ad Fontes, the interest in humanism, the study of ancient sources will influence Luther, John Calvin, and the other reformers to turn against the church. Criticisms from within the church will eventually lead to much needed reforms like the Council of Trent and the Counter-Reformation, which will spur on its own artistic movement with great figures like Caravaggio, one of my favorite artists, depicting in Chiarismo these incredible, beautiful paintings of religious imagery. Renaissance painter, but Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, all of them patroned at one point or another, not just by rich Italian businessmen, but by the church itself. Of course, if you think of the humanism and the importance of the individual and of humans in the creation of God, perhaps no painting is better. By the way, here's a quick aside. There's Henry VII, the King of England, who ends the War of the Roses, brings peace to England, and establishes Tudor supremacy. And this man is Henry VIII. Yes, this is Henry VIII at about the age of 16. You think of him as the old fat man, but this is him as a young, virile man right after his brother Arthur dies and he marries his wife, Catherine of Aragon, which is why he believes he's cursed and can't have a damn son. Yes, he's really that self-centered and stupid. But he believes that God is cursing him. And despite him taking England away from the Catholic Church, he will remain an abiding practicing Catholic with the Latin Mass until his own death. I'm trying to find probably the most famous painting of all the time. Here's another place to stop. There's Joan of Arc, whose fighting will allow France to shake off the English, which will influence both the French and the English in their own developments of the Renaissance. By the way, the French will suffer through many wars during the 16th century because of the religious divide between the Protestants, Huguenots, and the Catholics, which will continue, and one of the biggest players in that will be Catherine de' Medici, the queen consort of France, who tries to put one son after another, and finally, at the end of her life, sees Henry IV of Navarre convert to Catholicism and create some sort of toleration in France, which will last until Louis XIV. The French wars of religion are another huge part of the Renaissance, or at least the legacy of that. The scientific revolution of Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler, these are all religiously educated people. Copernicus is a priest. Some of their works are banned later by the church because they're seen as undermining the Old Testament scriptures in particular. They will be still extremely influential in the development I'm sorry, I can't remember what I was going to say. I'm distracted. There's Galileo. That's what I was talking about. The development of our basic scientific understandings of a heliocentric universe with the planets going in an elliptical form, and of course, the development of ideas about the moon, satellites, things like that. And of course, Galileo invents the best telescope. Let me see here. And European discovery and exploration will lead the French to Canada, the English to the 13 colonies, and the Spanish way before them to Latin America and the development of their empires. Again, a huge reward of technological developments. I'm just picking random photos at this point. And there's King Henry VIII in all of his fat glory. I don't mean to fat shame anyone, but Henry VIII was, a pretty nasty guy. So not that he deserves to be shamed for being fat, but he deserves to be shamed for being an absolute jerk. Need I say more? Let's see here. By the way, this is the time when, if you're wondering what's happening in the rest of the world, the Mughal Empire is rising in India. The Russians get their first czar in 1547. The Native Americans will obviously die mainly from diseases, but also warfare with the Europeans, who will take many of their lands. The Dutch Golden Age of the 17th century is totally because of the Northern Renaissance, which inspires the Dutch Reformation, and of course their fight against the Spanish, the Habsburgs, to gain their independence. By the way, Henry IV of France coming to power through at the end of Catherine de' Medici's life brings the House of Valois to an end and leads to the rise of the Bourbon family. The Holy Roman Empire, because Charles V cannot crush the Protestant revolt as he sees it, he resigns right before he dies. And despite this fact that the Habsburgs will continue to build a huge empire throughout the world, particularly in Latin America, the Protestants are here to stay. And because of the printing press and the inventions of the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation will continue and abide and will not be easily crushed out or stamped out by the church, despite its heavy persecution of the Protestants and constant religious warfare. And here we are. But the Habsburgs will decline in their power. The Holy Roman Empire will not be as influential, but you will see the Spanish continue to build a huge empire. And of course, here is probably this is the background I was looking for, that I wanted to be the background for the entire lecture, but I'm glad I had a bunch of other ones. This is the greatest painting maybe in human history, or at least the most famous and recognizable. It hangs today, please, hopefully I'm not wrong, in the Louvre, the Mona Lisa. Now, if there is anything that sums up my entire lecture, think of the Mona Lisa. Think of this beautiful woman with this very, very slight smile, this background of this fumato, this mixing of palettes, the interest in watercolors and acrylics and different art is obviously part of the Renaissance. The access to it through trade routes makes art easier. The paintings and the portraiture, it's obviously what's called a secular painting. Not that it is made by a secular artist, but it is a painting of a woman in a secular context. She is not at church. She is not based on the Virgin Mary, at least not explicitly. She is not a religious image at all. She is a secular image. She is the wife of a Venetian merchant and who is a patron of Leonardo da Vinci. So there's the patronage system. You see the beautiful art. I mean, there's something very mesmerizing about this painting. When you look at it, you see the road in the background. I always wish I was on that road walking up to her and her husband. And yes, it is at the Louvre, so I was right. And she is very photogenic, but she's very neutral, as James is saying. And he's absolutely right. There's a very neutral thing about her but it's so demure, so preppy, that it's very beautiful at the same time. And this is what the Renaissance is, in my opinion. This glorification and understanding of humanity, its subtleties, its beauty, its inner strength. It is a total product and example of Renaissance art, patronage, ideas, which is the engine that moves history. But in many ways, it is also an excellent depiction of a very simple, prosaic way of life that is not overtly religious, but is subtly religious, but at the same time is also very individualistic, very free-flowing, and very open. And I know that's a lot to encounter with this painting, but this is what the Renaissance is. It is Europe's reawakening. It is Europe's rebirth of ancient ideas, but in many ways it's a new European chapter. It's not Europe becoming something that it used to be under the Greco-Romans, because the Greco-Romans wouldn't have understood patronage or banking by the Medicis or any of these sorts of things. This is a new Europe. The old Europe can't come to the phone because it's dead. This is a new Europe that is being influenced, which is a melting pot of the ideas and theology of the late Middle Ages, along with the Greco-Roman world, the access to new technology that allows them to trade and settle faraway lands, and also the ability to study ancient texts in their original languages while writing down and copying and collating them in their own native languages, the vernacular. This is for me the epitome and personification and microcosm of all of those different ideas melting together into a pot that becomes known as the Renaissance. And now, these people were nothing like us in their sense of individuality and humanism. They still had very, very strong classist binds that were left over from the Dark Ages, but although the Dark Ages is a misnomer in my opinion. But this is a very, very strong and wonderful depiction of the subtle changes that go on throughout Europe. The Renaissance is indeed quite subtle. And some people just see it as a continuation of developments that were already happening during the late Middle Ages. And you look at the 14th century, and you can actually say, thanks to the Black Death, the works of Giotto and Dante Alighieri, in many ways, we were already on our way to patronage systems, to more and more three-dimensional paintings that could be religious and could be secular, and to a new understanding of a merchant class that's actually able to pay people to pay art for them, something that would have been unthinkable in the Middle Ages. The social changes brought about by the Black Death, which I've talked about a lot, along with the rise in vernacular languages and the study of the human creature as an individual. Some people have argued, some historians, and I don't buy the argument completely, that the Renaissance didn't happen. The Renaissance is a continuation of the High Middle Ages. Now, I think that is a radical backwards answer to the whole, well, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages don't exist. The Dark Ages don't exist, but the Renaissance does exist, and the High Middle Ages do exist, and they're different entities. The Renaissance does take the things that were already brewing in the pot at the end of the 14th century and goes wild with them in the 15th and the 16th centuries, to the point where Europe, again, as I've said, is totally unrecognizable by 1600 compared to what it was in 1500, and 1500 is totally unrecognizable in many ways to 1400. You have the development of an entire colonization of two new continents. You have a worldwide connection thanks to Magellan. You have all of these things that didn't exist anymore, that were just unfathomable to the Europeans in 1399, but are totally understandable by 1499 and completely understood by 1599. So, anyways, that is my live stream lecture. I'll leave the painting up of the Mona Lisa because I think it's a beautiful background to accompany me the rest of the way through. We went over an hour on this live stream lecture. There's just so much about the Renaissance, and I don't think that I've even covered everything. And there's probably going to be a couple of things that occur to me in the next few minutes where I'm like, I should have talked about that because that's just so integral to what they are. You can see the Age of Discovery, the Scientific Revolution, the Protestant Reformation, and the political changes and shifts in Europe, and the development, in many ways, of an Italian nationality that hadn't really existed before, thanks to Dante and Giotto, and then later, of course, Leonardo da Vinci. Oh, I didn't even talk about polymaths. Polymaths were these incredible people who were skilled at not just one thing, but at many different things. They were well studied, they were well read, they wrote different types of works of literature, and they studied ancient languages, their own languages. They were polylingual, and they were also able to be experts at different fields: science, mathematics, history, art, and Leonardo is a great example of that. And these polymaths, like Thomas More, were very, very common. Michelangelo, Thomas More, Luther in some ways is a polymath. Erasmus is certainly a polymath, are very common throughout both the Northern and Southern Renaissance during the 15th and 16th and 17th centuries. Now, how does the Renaissance actually end? The Renaissance, it ends in these new movements that kind of are dendritic forces away from it, such as the Reformation, the Renaissance, and the Age of Exploration and the Scientific Revolution. So in many ways, the Renaissance is consumed by her own children in these new societies, or in these new movements that will have their own huge way of shaping the world. Now, I've lectured on the Reformation before. We need a scientific revolution lecture. Now, many people will say that the Renaissance causes the dissolution of religious Europe, for better or for worse. I don't think that's true. Again, I think the Renaissance is in many ways a religious movement, but like so many things about the Renaissance, it's very subtle. The Enlightenment is impossible without the Renaissance, but so is the Reformation. So the Reformation, which is a completely religious movement, and the Enlightenment, which is not religious, are both completely dependent on the Renaissance. So the Renaissance sits in a spectrum between the religious and the secular world. And humanism is a huge part of that, because humanism is not intended to be secular. As Erasmus and More wouldn't have thought of this. These men, Erasmus was a priest, More becomes a saint. These men were not ever thinking of the world in terms of secular humanism. It's not to say that secular humanism is totally disconnected from the humanism that developed. The bedrock of that was created in the Renaissance. So answering the question, did the Renaissance, it might be a more difficult question to answer. Did the Renaissance happen, but did the Renaissance ever end? Because it really kind of morphs into these different movements that follow afterwards. So again, I said I was over 5 minutes ago, but there's just so much to talk about and so many things that occur to me. Please stop me and start asking questions about history and social studies before, so we can move on to the hour that I promised of Q&A. So we're going to go, we're 73 minutes in. So we're going to go 173, or 73, we're going to go, where's my math? 133 minutes in. So we're going to go over 2 hours now, because I promised you an hour of Q&A as well. And we'll see how well that goes, because that can lead anywhere. But I'm going to keep the background of the Mona Lisa up. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. It's great to see so many of our friendly neighborhood historian faces in the crowd today. How did the Renaissance impact immigration to the New World? Well, the technology made it easier for the Europeans to travel and get to the New World, but it's also this idea of not wanting to deal with the Ottomans because of the fall of the Byzantine Empire, and wanting to get to Asia in different ways that will inspire Columbus and the Portuguese, and they're going to create two major empires. So immigration to the New World is a huge part of God, glory, and guns, of the God, glory, and gold of the Renaissance. And of course, during the Renaissance and the latter part of the Renaissance, many of the goods, the cash crops that the Europeans find, like coffee was mentioned earlier, are brought over to Europe and are integrated into European societies. So you not only now have new art, making an eclectic city, art and architecture and philosophy, you now have new cuisine, you have new food, you have new drinks, you have new things that you never had before. That will revolutionize the way you experience life and adds a level of pleasure and comfort to it that didn't happen before. And of course, like many things in any sort of capitalistic or proto-capitalistic society, you will have the rich having easy access to it at first, and then later it trickling down, no pun intended, to the other classes. But if you don't think that's true, look at the price of the first cell phone. All right. Well, Just Frasher, I'm so glad that you're here. And Justy Frasher is a member. That's why they have the emoji. So please consider becoming a member. But hopefully that answered your question, Hars. Do you think the collapse of the British Empire was a net positive or net negative on the global level? I think that it's interesting. I don't know. I think the British Empire did a lot of terrible things. But I don't know that if the British Empire had continued, that it would have necessarily continued to do terrible things and oppress its colonials the way it had previously. It would have been very interesting to see if the Americans had allowed the British to continue their empire into the 1970s and 80s, if the British would have continued the colonial oppressor versus oppressed narrative that we often hear in Africa and India, or would there have been, in the wake of the last World War and the horrors of the Holocaust, a better understanding of human rights and how to treat the people of these different areas, so there would have been a better relationship between Europeans and non-Europeans that they colonized. It's possible that that might have emerged. The power vacuums, the political dissolution, the chaos, and the murder and the destruction of the decolonization of the British and French empires has really left huge marks on the world that continue to, and wounds that continue to bleed, fires that continue to blaze. I can't say one way or the other. Many people, meanwhile, in these countries are very happy to be rid of the Europeans, but they are not happy or content with their society's position in the world right now, particularly in Africa. What happened to the British sugar and tobacco slave Caribbean colonies? Jamaica gained its independence. I forget when Britain let Jamaica gain its independence. I think the 1960s. Same thing with most of them, but they still own Bermuda. Bermuda is semi-autonomous, but the British still technically own it. What human rights improvements came out of the Renaissance? It's part of the humanism, but there's the end of serfdom. There's a better understanding of individuals all being made in the image of God and thus needing to be glorified. There's more social mobility. There's the creation of an economic banking system. I could argue that all of those are human rights improvements. there is a little bit more of an understanding of the dignity of humans. There's calls for more political rights for humans. And while you do have Machiavelli, you have others like More who are thinking about what if a society was much more balanced and fair to all individuals inside of it, no matter what their occupation or status is. So you're seeing the rumblings of what will influence natural rights and individual rights that will be much more of an Enlightenment thing in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Romans were very organized. The soldiers received a pension after 20 years, just like we do today. True. The Romans were really good at carrot and stick. Very, very good at carrot and stick with their different classes and workers. I feel like you are John McCain-like guy, Friendly History, in that I'm a war hero. That was still the time of child labor on their own border, right? And why are these cucks always claiming the wealth of the rich? You are still peasants. I don't know what you mean, but take a chill pill. What human rights abuses came from the Renaissance? I mean, you have the creation of slavery in the interactions with the Europeans and the Africans and the natives because they believe them to be inferior and needing to be Christianized in the context of doing basically forced labor. The economía system is extremely deleterious to natives in Central and South America when the Spanish set it up after their colonization of those areas when they destroyed the Incas and Aztecs. I believe there's a matching painting to the Mona Lisa, the one of her husband. What do I have? There is, but it's not as famous. I think I've seen it like once. Let me see here. Zeph, yeah, Egyptians learned from other societies like Phoenicians. True. Do you think the Egyptians had help with the pyramids? They could have. I think a lot of slaves helped them. The Renaissance was only for the white and rich. Well, we're looking at the Europeans, so of course it's only for the white. It's not just for the rich. Or maybe it is, in a way, the aristocracy. But in a way, the aristocracy is bigger than it used to be. It's not just the nobility anymore. Because the Middle Ages, the upper class rich are the nobility, almost bar none. But in the Renaissance, you actually get the development of people who are not noble blood, not blue-blooded, who are considered still to be genetically superior at this time, who are wealthy and rich. Human rights improvements wasn't applied everywhere. People had to seize those ideas and fight for them just to gain their freedom and dignity. I mean, yeah, that's common throughout history, this pull and push narrative of gaining your rights. Well, I'm glad you're watching us, John Q. Public. I really appreciate it. Friendly History, how did I already answer that? I'm just going through the chat, trying to answer questions. Let me see. I'm really glad you enjoyed the lecture. Yeah, the Q&A is Fridays and Saturdays at 6, but we're doing an hour of Q&A because it's Martin Luther King Day weekend, so we're doing a special, and we are doing a live stream lecture about him tomorrow. And by the way, we are doing after that. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. After that, we're doing an hour of Q&A for my members. So if you are a member of the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, you get an hour of private talk with me where, because there's less members than there is everybody else, it's just us talking, chilling, hanging out, and getting questions answered. So hopefully, and that will be available to members before and during and after. So that's at 8 p.m. Eastern on Martin Luther King Day. So please check that out. Just wanted to say your internet and sound is so much better lately. I'm so glad, Amir. We have the better microphone that we're using. I love this retro microphone, kind of a 30s, 40s style, and we've been working on the internet. And Obscura is now a member, thanks to Tanya. Thank you so much, Tanya. Like, the white man's burden is something for only specific people, and those specific people would be for those who benefit from it or only know it about it, academia. Well, that's the idea of paternalism, that basically the Europeans had the rights to civilize these different societies and make them more European. How far east did the Renaissance extend? Do you consider Russia part of the Renaissance? No. Russia doesn't really experience the Renaissance. Russia is pretty backwards. Russia's Renaissance will come later, although Ivan the Terrible was very keen on creating strong mercantile and political alliances with the Europeans, particularly the English. The Renaissance probably goes, and thank you so much, Amir, for the super chat. I really appreciate it and you being here. But and all the money you give to this channel and anyone gives to this channel goes towards making everything here better, getting better equipment, getting better technology, learning and information so that I can produce the best content I possibly can. Remember, I'm no notes. I don't use notes. I use references and study, but I don't use scripts or anything like that. Just off the cuff all the time here. So I say the Renaissance is primarily a Western and Southern European phenomenon. that affects the different Western European countries that it inhibits differently. The Ottomans are not going to go through it. They have their own cosmopolitan, eclectic society that's even more impressive than the Europeans in many ways. The Mughal Indians are not going to go through it. They have their own thing going on. This is also kind of goes along with the fall of the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan. It's not going to impact Central Europe as much. They're going to be continually blighted and distracted by the Ottoman threat, as is Charles V and the Holy Roman Empire and the Austrians. So it's kind of a Western and Southern European thing. Explain the transition from a republican of symmetrical to asymmetrical paintings as the new form of excellence. From replication of symmetrical to asymmetrical, I don't know enough about that to actually comment on it. We still own Bermuda, Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and Turks and Caicos Islands. Yep. I believe there's I already answered that about the matching painting. Let's see here. Other questions. What currency was used in the Renaissance era? Coinage was common. There wasn't, I don't know that they had paper currency by that point. I think this is kind of a time when they get paper currency. There's actually more than that, but some of them are tied into administrative units with others. That's nice. How come the Spanish didn't take over the entire Iberian Peninsula from the Portuguese? The Portuguese got their independence from the Muslims before the Spanish did, so that's what separates Portugal from Spain. Portugal was in its own independent country, while Castile, Leon, and Aragon had not been united into the Kingdom of Spain. Western countries did believe themselves superior because it was in their economic interest to do so, and therefore a convenient rhetoric. Well, I mean, it's always in the economic convenience. It's a cart and horse argument. Do they consider themselves to be superior, and therefore they do? Do they consider themselves to be superior, and therefore it helps their economy, or do they do that, or do they consider themselves? Do they think their economy is superior, therefore they consider themselves to be superior? So, and yes, there was a short time when the Spanish actually did control all of Iberia, but that's because of the Habsburgs and their dominance, where basically Philip II was the heir to the Portuguese throne and integrated it into his kingdom in the late 1500s. So that's called the Iberian Union, and eventually falls apart as the Habsburgs' dominance over Spain and their empire starts to whittle in the 17th century. So, other questions? I'm going to take a sip of water. I'm not funded by Crystal Geyser. Hopefully one day I will be funded and sponsored by them, but they sure are good. I love how people show up, put comments in the chat that I'm thinking of now, then just don't have the patience to wait and write them again at the end. They don't want to listen to the lecture. So, let's see. What else? Other questions about history or social studies? Because I'm looking at some of these comments from way before when I was still doing the lecture. Yes, Juju, the background is really nice. Now let me see. Somebody was asking about the Basque. Well, the Basque are a distinct people altogether who settled in northern Spain, northwestern Spain, and that area was never conquered by the Muslims. Who's the best president, leader, ruler, or the likes in known history? Who's the greatest ruler in all of human history? Oh, Elizabeth I probably considers some consideration. Suleiman the Magnificent. Of course, Abraham Lincoln, Peter the Great, Charlemagne, Augustus Caesar. You have to go through the different empires and think of them at different times to think about who actually deserves that. Qianlong in China, Liu Bang, who creates the Han Dynasty. Let me see here. Why are there no well-known sculptors today? Art isn't focused. I mean, there's well-known sculptors today who are modernist and postmodern artists, and there's kind of this feeling that everything that's been done has already been done, so why reinvent the wheel? I think the 1846 potato famine in Ireland explains the 8% Irish, my 23andMe. I don't know who that was in my ancestry. Who knows? I wonder what kind of history they teach in America, because it wouldn't be the truth. Well, that's exactly the history you've been listening to from me, and everything I've told you, as far as I know, is true. MLK was a Freemason bootlicker of the synagogue. Okay, Boomer. Can you speak a little on Martin Luther King historically, as this being a time of year of his memorial remembrance? That'll be the live stream lecture tomorrow, but go watch my video on Martin Luther King. Hars, can you put that in the chat? I don't want your kosher panties to get in too much of a bind, so I'll let you figure it out which one you won't, because I'm not kosher. So people just come in and insult me and then leave. And it better be true Egyptian history because they couldn't speak Arabic. The Egyptians are not Arabic. Let me see here. This is what the kids should be learning outside our own history, Western history. They should learn all history, in my opinion. What about Stalin's direct distrust of Chinese state communism versus Russian communism? He was more than willing to use the Chinese to his own means, but there is a lot of distrust and fear that stalks the relationships between Mao and Stalin, and then later Mao and Khrushchev. Was communism a direct consequence of Stalin creating the Holodomor? Or it's either communism was the direct result of that, or the Holodomor is a direct result of communism. Pick your poison. Let me see here. Doctor Who, What, Where, I hope you're here. Okay. Well, I think I've caught up with all the old chat messages. Now let's see the newer chat messages and the new questions here. Let me see. So there was no Renaissance in other countries and empires. I mean, you could argue that other countries had similar forms of Renaissance. You could argue that the Islamic Golden Age is a type of Renaissance. You could argue that whenever a society or area of the world goes through economic, technological, and cultural development, that it is a form of a Renaissance. That's why it's called the Carolingian Renaissance in the 8th century with Charlemagne. Did Martin Luther gain notoriety from the free press, or did Martin Luther propel the free press? In some ways, he propelled it, but his ideas were disseminated because the press was already there and available. It was Hampton Court Palace that was built. That's true. Hampton Court was given by Wolsey to Henry VIII, not Windsor. I also should correct what I said yesterday about the USS Liberty. The USS Liberty was not destroyed by Israeli mortars or ground artillery. It was destroyed by jet planes and torpedo boats. And the official story is that it was a case of mistaken identity, which has not satisfied any of the conspiracy theorists on either side, although both the American and Israeli government have agreed to that. So I'm correcting my own mistakes from there. It was 71 crew members who died and a number of hundred who were injured. And it was in, of course, the Six-Day War. So I'm correcting my own mistakes right now. Let me see here. Trump the best president? Oh, God, why? Right now it's Lincoln, and Lincoln's not going to get touched except if you want to potentially suggest Washington. Whatever foods were beneficial. Did potato come after the Renaissance? Yes, they came out of the Renaissance. These were cash crops brought to Europe by the Europeans from the New World. So you could say those are an indirect consequence of the Renaissance. Cash crops, including tobacco, cotton, sugar, indigo, but also, of course, potatoes and tomatoes. Not European, but of course thought of as European. Based on the historical context, is it smart to open the borders for thousands plus people per year? I mean, rigid border security has been the norm in human history. The idea of positive immigration and looking at immigration as a positive thing is a development of the modern world. It is not something that would have occurred to many Renaissance thinkers. Defending your own lands, it's easier for ancient and even medieval people to be xenophobic than it is for modern people, and at least not get criticized for it. Did Christopher Columbus have a quadrant and compass in his first American voyage? I think he did. He believed by going west you could get to India. He wasn't off course. He actually wasn't even wrong. He just thought the world was a lot smaller than it was. The Egyptians are not Arabic. You have a major gap in knowledge in Mena religion. It's early surface level Zionist revision bull. No, the Egyptians are not Arabs. You could say the Egyptians are Semitic, but they are not Arabic. The ancient Egyptians are not Arabs. How did settlers escape cannibalism and in 1618 an American develop the wherewithal to prosper without the ingenuity to nourish themselves with the continuation dispute with the natives? You're referring to Plymouth, the fact that a lot of them died. As good Christians, they did not believe that resorting to cannibalism would be useful for them. What do you know about the USS Maine? Enlighten us. It was blown up, some say by the Spanish, more likely by engine failure near Havana, near Cuba, and that obviously prompted the United States to go to war with Spain because they basically, journalists like Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, who are somehow the heroes of journalism, despite the fact that they were manipulative liars, exaggerated the case of Maine in order to get the U.S. involved in a war that would be very, very beneficial to the U.S. and their own political agenda because they wanted the U.S. to become an empire that started the U.S. on the course to the Spanish-American War. I've done an entire live stream lecture on the two American wars of the 19th century that they actually won, the Spanish and the Mexican-American War. Why is China considered such an ancient empire when it's had so many cultural and political revolutions? Because the Chinese have this unbroken line, or it's not unbroken, but this continual desire and yearning to be empires, starting with the Xia all the way down to the Qin. Okay, now can you hear me? Good. Sorry about that. I don't know why I went muted. It doesn't have the muted icon on. Harry was asking stupid leading questions about Donald Trump. I'm not going to talk about Donald Trump and all of this stuff. Has mass deportations happened in human history? Yes. Are they necessarily a good thing? No. Have they always been bad? Not necessarily either. It happens. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. If you want me to give an analysis on Donald Trump, Harry, because you always ask leading questions about him, why don't you give a super chat? Because I don't talk about political issues without a super chat. I will talk about them in historical context, but it's normally only with a super chat, and I'm not going to give my opinion on a particular issue. Did you touch on who? I mean, this is just absolute absurdity. I'm so sick of this nonsense from both sides of the aisle wanting to push my channel in a way it's not going to go. This isn't a political channel. I'm not here to talk about Donald Trump and Israel 24/7. You all are trying to push me there, and I'm getting ticked off by it. I'm tired of this. I cannot believe the TDS that people have, where it's Trump, 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 Israel, 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 Israel. People have this negative fascination with a fat orange president and a small country in the middle of the Middle East that none of you live in. You have an obsession with these things. Harry, you live in Great Britain. You aren't under Trump. You're under a much less popular leader. I mean, I just can't even fathom why people are so obsessed with dragging my channel to the depths of hell with this political nonsense all the time. When can we ever just be a history channel? Why does everybody have to find out what I think of the Yuden? And then, yes, and I'm using that intentionally because that's the way they think about it. Why? I mean, I get cults of personality. I've studied it all throughout history. People can be whipped up into a cult of personality where it's like, oh my God, this person is great. Isn't he great? You must think he's great. You must love him, right? That's creepy and get away. But the negative energy that people have, where their obsession is all negative, is even more off-putting. The only people more obsessed with Israel and Jews than Jews themselves are anti-Semitic jerks who come onto this live stream and ask leading questions and then are surprised to find out that I actually know something about the issue, which is why exactly I backtracked at the beginning of the Q&A and corrected myself about what I've said about the Israeli situation in regards to the USS Liberty. Because I know that the people who come onto this channel will never let me live it down that I was incorrect about some things yesterday. Oh my God, I was incorrect. Wow, friendly neighborhood history is human? Friendly neighborhood history doesn't want to talk about politics all the time? Brilliant. Incredible. It's almost like I'm a human being with feelings, thoughts, and ideas. And there was a world before everybody was obsessed with Donald Trump. And there was a world before everyone was obsessed with the Jews. Actually, unfortunately, in European history and Western history, there hasn't much of a world before that because obsession with Jews has gone back for thousands of years for some reason for people. So, anyways. I'm going to get back to the actual stuff, the actual history. Did the Crusades have any influence on the Renaissance? Tony, if you had shown up earlier at the beginning of a live stream lecture, you would have heard me explain exactly how the Crusades influenced the Renaissance. Please go and watch the beginning of the lecture. But yes, the Crusades were very influential. Islamic learning and scholarship influenced Renaissance thinking and understandings in both the late Middle Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance. I'm not a sentient AI. I have the historical encyclopedic information and knowledge of an AI, but I'm also a human being. I mean, why are people so obsessed with this nonsense? Here, okay, so let me see, what else? Yeah, Harry, pay £5 and then we can talk about Donald Trump. I mean, I know that you listen to whatever the British media tells you to think, and I don't because I don't trust the media in any country, basically. That's why I haven't done them for a while, but I do try to do daily news updates. But yeah, I've not made one comment about Donald Trump this live stream. Wow, that's incredible. Good for you. Wow, a History Channel stream that's about the frickin' Mona Lisa doesn't have one comment from a Brit about Donald Trump. What an accomplishment for you. You must feel so proud of yourself. Good boy. I never referred to Donald Trump and I said talk about it in a historical context. Give a super chat. I'm not stupid. We all know who you're talking about, Harry. How dumb do these people think I am? The people that come onto this channel and ask leading questions must think I'm stupid. And I'm sick of it. Did you know that the Israelis did something bad? No, I'm a total cuck, and I have no individual ability to synthesize information and no critical thinking skills. Even though if you listen to anything I say about any historical topic, you will see the demonstration over and over again of the ability to use critical thinking skills. Why is this difficult? It shouldn't be difficult. God in heaven. You've triggered the dark friendly history. I haven't been dark history in a while, but dark history is where I basically get ticked at somebody, usually a moderator, because they don't have the respect of me to actually engage with me honestly. So it gets into bad faith nonsense. 4th century of Islamic invasion into Christian land. I don't know if the Crusades were necessarily justified. Maybe just the first one because it was successful. Hope you enjoy Florence. It's absolutely beautiful, and take in all the Renaissance and send me pictures. Email me at friendlyneighborhoodhistory@gmail.com. I have no religion and politics on my gaming channel, but religion is unavoidable for history. Religion, yes, these things are unavoidable, and so is politics, but not modern concepts. I don't necessarily talk about the Trinity, the Christian belief that God is 3 persons, in relation, do I believe this, or what does it mean, or this or that? I don't. I will talk about it in a religious context only because the Council of Nicaea is extremely important to understanding the development of Western Christianity and Western Europe. I have to talk about religion, but I don't have to talk about theology necessarily. And I have to talk about political movements and ideas, but I don't have to talk about politics modern. Like, there's a difference between how has Donald Trump influenced politics over the last 10 years versus what do you think about abortion? I'm sorry, those are different things. Most people don't understand that because most people don't listen. I have no, let me see. When did friendly history become a sentient AI? Yes, I am sentient AI. It is perhaps more important to realize that the regime most difficult to change is oligarchy, the regime which occupies the central place in the order of the regimes presented in the Republic. That's true. And the Romans and the Greeks and the Renaissance political thinkers all thought that way, nobody. Did the Crusades have any influence? I already answered that. TDS goes both ways from what I've seen. Love or hate, people are weird. But there's something more off-putting than the red hat idiots. I'm sorry, a lot of them are idiots. A lot of them are just obsessed with this man. No matter what he says, even if it's like unabashedly stupid, they're like, oh my God, wasn't that great? No. Sorry, no. But then the other people on the other side insult my historical intelligence by saying, we've never seen this before and fascism is at the gates. Nonsense. We've seen it many times, even in American political history, even in the last 50 years. You just don't know enough because you've already made up your mind that Donald Trump is a Nazi and Nazis are bad, therefore Donald Trump bad, even though you don't know what a Nazi actually is. I'm sorry, but some people can just be so stupid. Positive cultic energy is based in ignorance. We know this. This is obvious to us. Look at Jonestown. Look at Heaven's Gate. Look at the Branch Davidians. But negative cultic energy, when you unite with people for some sort of pathological hatred of something, of a person or a group, that's just bizarre. And it's got all the same elements of weirdness and stupidity, but it's just bizarre. And by the way, if you're a Trump supporter, I don't think that you're necessarily stupid. And if you're a Trump hater, I don't think you're necessarily stupid. I just hate the lack of critical thinking that both extremes take. And I know there's a lot of people who say that and then they just support one side or the other. But my moderators who've known me for a year don't know my political views. They don't know my political views. I'm not like Harry because I'm not a nationalist and a socialist because I think National Socialism is evil. And I'm not just this flag-waving jingoist like other people because I know enough about history to know, yeah, America is a pretty cool place. And there's a lot of good things about the United States. There's a lot of bad things about the United States too. And America doesn't have to win every war to be the best country in the world. Yeah, BBC is the Lugan press now. Well, that's what Orwell thought. Orwell hated the BBC. He based the Ministry of Truth on the BBC. I don't know if you know that, but oh well. Looking forward to it. Got a walking tour booked. I hope you really enjoy it. We appreciate friendly history. Sorry, people can't escape their politics. Escape your escape. This is the thing. People talk about, we're so exhausted with politics. We're so exhausted. But then they talk about it nonstop. This is your escape. You've got 30 more minutes with me to ask me questions about history and social studies. Please drop them in the chat. Please like and subscribe. Yeah, I'm going to push myself right now because I'm tired of my own moderators not pushing me and pushing ideas instead. Can you explain the alliance between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia relations, and how does a theocratic government prohibits a possible idea of peace in the Middle East? The United States kind of got their relationship from the Saudis, inherited from the British. Basically, it's about oil and oil interests. And the Saudis are a theocratic government, kind of based in Wahhabi Islam. And the Saudi family, the Saud family, basically gained the ability to rule over Arabia because the British died to give it to them in the mandatory lands after the end of the Ottoman Empire and the Great War. Please comment. The Roman leader Theodosius may have been great for Christians, but not for Jews and pagans. Yes. That's not why Theodosius is considered great, by the way. Theodosius isn't considered great because of how he treated the Christians. Theodosius is considered great because he held the empire together, defeated the barbarian threats, and was the last one to rule over both halves before its collapse. The Western Roman Empire went to pot after he died. He's an incredible ruler by any stretch of the imagination. And Hars, can you please put the video of Theodosius the Great in the chat? And my one on Martin Luther King, since people have been asking about Dr. King. McCarthyism is the opposite side of a TDS coin. Kind of. Trump is retarded and his followers are in a cult. Actually, he's not. That's the problem. The problem might be that he's very, very smart. Just like, I mean, some of his ideas sound dumb, maybe, but that doesn't mean that he's retarded. And by the way, not all, this is so bad. I don't consider MAGA a cult. I don't consider the anti-MAGA people a cult. You're only in a cult if you buy into the cultic thinking. And Justin, we already know what you think about a bunch of these issues, so I understand where you're coming from, too. Where was the birthplace of the Renaissance? Florence. Explain the volatile relationship between the Taliban and the U.S. and also their support of ISIS factions to overthrow the Syrian regime. The U.S. hates the Taliban and has hated them for a long time, even though they helped create them in trying to fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 80s. Greetings, Belisarius. Why was Churchill so defiant against the German army? Unconfirmed statements say he said he had a loaded revolver and said he'd fight in London if Germany invaded. Churchill didn't mess around. And Churchill was prescient. Now, I know certain idiots on the internet believe Churchill was the bad guy. And this is what happens when you listen to Candace Owens all the time. You get this idea that, I cannot believe the world we live in today. I'm sorry to bring it back to this cultural, political mess that we're in. But we've gotten the horseshoe theory is true. The left and the right have decided to become friends about this issue, about the issue of war. War is nasty, volatile, broken, evil, and involves horrible things happening to people. But you cannot escape the idealism of war. The idealization that, we won't kill any civilians and there won't be any wars. Nonsense. There's going to be war. War is just an inevitable part of humanity. It doesn't make what happened to people in Dresden or what's happening to children in Gaza any less tragic than it is. Because it is. I know people on this channel sometimes believe that I don't think bad things are bad. But the fact of the matter is, war is here to stay. I'm sorry. Since the first humans decided to fight over a little bit of land or whatever the heck it was, the first proto-humans or Neanderthals or Homo erectus or habilis, humans have fought. They've also, there's a lot of good that we can learn, that trading is good for humans and mutual love is good for humans and cohabitation is good for humans. But I'm sorry, you aren't smarter than Socrates. Socrates knew war was bad, but Socrates also knew that war was going to happen. So the idea that Churchill is the bad guy is absurdity. Churchill knew the problems with the Germans and the Soviets, and he was ready to take them on. Yeah. I do want to make money with this stream. I deserve to make money with this stream because I'm telling it like it is. I'm sorry. I'm defiant. I'm in a defiant mood now. I'm like Churchill right now. And Emir, thank you for the super chat. I should breathe. You just know the first war was because of a woman. Or maybe it was over a woman. Have I ever fought over a woman? I don't need to fight over women. But anyways, what do historians mean when they say the High Renaissance is, say, compared to the Middle Renaissance? Again, it's the same way with it's like the Middle Renaissance is like the early fangled things in the 15th century. High Renaissance would be like Leonardo and Michelangelo. Like when you think of Renaissance, you think of that, and that's the High Renaissance. Same thing with the High Middle Ages. Both extremes ends are a cult. Groupthink, it's what happens. Sheep with no critical mind of their own. True. And people can be in a cult and not know it. Ahmed, all wrong. FDR actually had a friendship with King Abdul's friendship with U.S., not Britain, since 1920s. Wahhabism is a meme. Israel is the thorn of peace in the Middle East, not Saudi. Bad faith all around. I love this. I didn't say anything about the Jews or Israel, and yet you have to bring it up because you're obsessed and wicked with it. I'm sorry. It's obscene. What is the line from Christopher Hitchens? Obscene wickedness. That is this, I have to insert Jew. I have to insert this into this because I am upset about it. I don't care if you're upset about it. This is a history stream. This is a Wendy's. Yeah, yes, FDR had good relations with Ibn Saud. Ibn Saud would not have come to power without the British. The British and the Americans were close, especially after the war. And of course, the U.S. kind of takes over as the premier hegemonic force in the world, especially in the West afterwards. This impacts the relationships with the Saudis because the Western world is totally built on oil by the time you come out of the last World War. I'm sorry, Ahmed, you're incorrect. Can you tell us about some Venetian-Ottoman wars? The Venetians actually were pals with the Ottomans, at least in the sense of trading in the Eastern Mediterranean after the Byzantine Empire fell. And of course, Belisarius has the background of the great general of the Byzantine Empire. But basically, the Venetians had this idea that if they worked with the Ottomans, they could actually continue to be rich, which worked. But the Venetians eventually become one of the big figures. They had sent soldiers to fight against the Ottomans before, and they fight with their ships constantly, and they joined the Holy League, which is the effort by the Habsburgs to fight against the Ottomans. I talked a lot about this last Sunday on that live stream lecture, which also has a lot of questions. How close is America? I accept your apology, Harry. You were asking a question. You have an agenda. I shouldn't get mad at you. I know what you believe. You know what you believe. It's good that you believe it, and you have facts and arguments to back it up. It's not that I disagree with you. It's that I'm wondering why this matters in my channel right now. Next time, give me a couple pounds. How close is America to a civil war? I don't think it's that close. I'm sorry. I know it'd be fun for me. It would be really attention-grabbing for me to say, oh, we're about to have a civil war because look at what's happening in Minneapolis. No. What's prescient mean? The ability to know something before it happens. You just know the first war. Let me see. Remember to support your favorite channel. What do historians mean when they say high Renaissance? Okay, I've answered all of these. Was modern Islamic radicalism a product of humiliation in the face of military defeat, or is that argument a modern invention that tries to justify the violence? It's this idea of getting back to the basics of Islam in order to win back what you have lost. So radical Islam is extremely violent because it believes that ancient Islam is extremely violent. And it's kind of a purism of Islam, hoping to bring it back to what it once was in its glory days. And it's also resistance to the Ottomans, who had become corrupt, lazy, and very liberal in their religious understanding, despite the fact that they claimed to be the caliphate because they took both Mecca and Medina. So, yeah, modern militant Islam is a reaction to colonialism, it's a reaction to the Ottomans, and it's a hope to win over, to be victorious in their struggle, which is why people misunderstand jihad as a military struggle when jihad is the struggle against sin and is in the heart of every single Muslim. 1972 Munich Olympics. What happened? Oh, boy. A bunch of people from the Israeli team were kidnapped and held hostage, and some of them were murdered by Palestinian extremists or Arab extremists. I don't know which one. I don't remember which one. What happened before I joined, if you don't mind me asking? Everything seems so odd. Well, we were talking about, I did what I thought was an amazing lecture on the Renaissance, and what made it so amazing was everybody asking great questions, and we got to talk about so many great things. It's not me that was amazing. It's the Renaissance itself that's amazing. And then all of a sudden, everybody decided to start making this a political chat because all of a sudden this channel is political. Barack Obama lifting embargo on Cuba distorted the narrative that Russian influence is dangerous to the Monroe Doctrine. If history is right, will Russia wants to deploy military there? Russia and Cuba are not close right now. This war is getting out of hand in all directions. Trump is getting too far with Greenland. We need world market. That's going to destroy. Yeah, I guess. We'll see. I don't expect the U.S. to invade Greenland. That would be really, really crazy. I read Theodosius the Great was called great for his role in establishing Christianity. That's one of the reasons why, and of course the Christians are the victors, they write the history, but of course I think that Theodosius is pretty great on his own. He doesn't need that to make him great. And those cognomens are usually added after they die. Although at least I have somewhat more knowledge than other maniacs who just don't like Trump for yes, you have your reasons, you have them, but you're parroting narratives, which is fine as long as you can back up and prove those narratives. Surah 21:191. Huh? People are quoting religious. What do I say about quoting religious verses? And kill them, non-Muslims, wherever you find them. Kill them, such as the recompense of the disbelievers, non-Muslims. That's Islam. That's one form of Islam. Do you know how many verses in the Bible call for violence and destruction? I mean, I'm not going to do the whataboutism. Islam, the problem is simple, and it shouldn't be over the top. Most Muslims are very peaceful and do not take those words literally and have reinterpreted their Quran in the face of a modern, interconnected global system. There are many Muslims who have not done that yet, but many Christians who have done what the other group did. But there are many Muslims who have not done that yet, and because of that, you have radical Muslims running around doing that. So did Islam spread mostly by sword? Yes. In many ways, so did most religions. Christianity did the same. If free speech gives Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes, is it such a good idea? Seems like truth is hard to find nor popular. I still believe at my heart of core being, as much as I absolutely despise the rhetoric of both of them, that it is better that they speak and prove themselves a fool than to be forced to be kept silent and make people wonder if they're actually onto something. The Streisand effect is real. You censor someone for their beliefs, and they are going to, or try to shut someone up, and they're going to get more attention than if you didn't try to shut them up. People are defiant enough to do that. It's just part of our psychology. If Candace Owens was banned from every platform, she'd be bigger than she ever was before. Fuentes has already been banned, and look at the attention he's gotten. Fuentes should not be debanked. He should not be deplatformed. He should be able to express all of his views. He should be on YouTube, just like I am. There's no reason why not. And then he should be ripped apart. It's that simple. The problem is that when you censor these people, you give people the thought of A, a victimhood mentality, and B, maybe they're onto something. A, they are not victims, they are users, and B, they're not onto anything. And yeah, that's my opinion. And it's not a political opinion, because, I don't know, the idea that, Egyptian planes in the French Foreign Legion killed Charlie Kirk, I don't think that's political. The idea that we should avoid black people at all costs, I don't think that's political. I just think that's nonsense. I was replying to the original poster who said, Saudi is the threat, peace not with you. Your particular sin is having quite superficial info regarding the Middle East. Sorry. What's superficial about my information about the Middle East? I'm sorry. I don't know what's superficial about it. I know enough about it. I'm still waiting for you to explain what's superficial about my knowledge about the Middle East. By the way, how come when human tools were found in continents, megafauna in that continent not always went extinct after some time? Don't know. Why did the Crusades attack Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade? They saw the Byzantine Christians as their enemies because in their mind they were just as much infidels as the Muslims themselves. Tell us some stuff about the Inca, please. The empire didn't last long, only for about a century and a half. Ruled kind of along the western coast of what is Peru and Chile. Never a huge empire, not encompassing of all of Central or South America. And they are known for their cities built in the hills like Machu Picchu and Cusco, easy access for them to see their enemies. They loved terrace farming where they built their farms into those hills, so it was easier for them to glean resources that way. I believe we know how the ancient Egyptians built the pyramids. They used water power and fed rocks up from the inside like a volcano. That'd be kind of cool if that was true. And Hars is back. Hars, can you put the video to Martin Luther King and Winston Churchill in the chat? People are asking about it. Explain the uprising of Mexican drug cartels and their involvement shifting the political power dynamics in there. Well, it's Mexican drug cartels operate both south and north of the American border with Mexico. In many ways, just like the mafia and other mob groups, they are representative, especially in the United States, of immigrant groups seeking to gain the glories and riches of America, of this American dream that they think is so elusive through illicit means. And every immigrant group has done this before. But they are extremely predominant in their political influence and economic power in Mexico. Explain the good, bad, and ugly of Henry Kissinger legacy. Oh, geez. The good, he was a brilliant diplomat. He knew how to negotiate and get things done. He won a Nobel Peace Prize because of this. The bad, he organized the destruction of large amounts of people in areas, such as the bombings of Cambodia and Laos during the Vietnamization phase of the Nixon administration. Ugly basically had too many fingers in the pie and was, in his work as both the head of the NSA and then later as Secretary of State, oversaw the overthrowing of governments that were duly elected by their people in the sake of the United States, basically trying to fight communism. He's a good Cold Warrior. He is bad when it comes to regarding human rights, and he is ugly when it comes to handling things in an appropriate and reasonable manner. Yes, free speech is important. In Scotland, you can get 7 years for breaking the law. I don't know a combination of words that are equal to 7 years in prison. In my opinion, almost everything should be permissible. You should be able to say almost everything. Freedom of expression is overrated. Freedom of speech is where it's at. Can you speak some about the Chechen wars? I don't know enough about it to speak about them. Friendly history, you have weird views. You think about a good amount of things Trump says that the left says is wrong, his credibility, but you also say things that is against the right and is leftist. Yes. It's almost as if I'm looking at this from a different lens, like the lens of history. Oh, wait, that's what I'm doing. Give a synopsis of paper money in the United States and how it influenced the transformation towards a number one superpower. Hamilton is huge in this because what Alexander Hamilton does is he forces the debts of the states to be taken on by the federal government and creates a national bank. He gets Washington's permission to do this. By taking on these debts, he creates a deficit for the U.S. government, but he also unifies the American currency into one proper form. This had been an issue that had been prevalent during the Revolution and after, where the Continental Congress had not been able to really successfully print money. And then the Articles of Confederation, each state had their own currency. By being able to regulate the currency through a national banking system, Hamilton set the basis of a cohesive American dollar. One of the reasons why he's on the $10 bill. Freedom of expression is plenty. Freedom of speech is overrated. No, freedom of expression is I can say whatever I want except all of these things. That's not freedom. I wholly disapprove of what you say and will defend to the death your right to say it. Absolutely. Greek independence. The Greeks basically fight in the waves of nationalism that come after the Napoleonic Wars. They fight a war against the Turks and are actually able to successfully overthrow the Ottomans. This is probably the first sign of high-scale Ottoman decline, and by 1832, the Greeks gained their independence. They're the first nation-state created in the 19th century in Europe outside of Belgium, and this won't be the last because you see Italy and Germany going through similar processes, as well as Bulgaria, to gain their independence, whether by revolution or political unification. So basically, the unification of the Greeks leads to them being able to overthrow the Turks. Oh, who doesn't love Voltaire? Hello, Thane. Good to see you. I'm not trying to insult you, just your talking points regarding Islam. Radical Islam, historical Islam, and Middle East, and literally Reddit tier superficial. You need to read a lot more. You haven't explained to me once what is superficial about it. And to insult me by saying it's Reddit tier is sad. Have you been on Reddit? I am not welcome on Reddit because you know what? I have critical thinking skills. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. I tell people things all the time that they don't want to hear, and I don't care because truth is better than not truth. Have you done a historical video for Brighton around Roman times? Oh, I've done one about Boadicea, or Boudica. I've talked a little bit about it. Look up my Roman emperors videos, that entire series. I talk about Roman conquest with Claudius. I think I have a long-form video on Julius Caesar. I have one about Augustus that talks about Britain a little bit. I don't know why people want to ask about your ideals on a history channel, but I don't care what people have views on unless National Socialists or anything extremist or bad. This is a history space. Yeah, and I am more than willing to engage with Nazis because history is against them too. When was the freedom of speech regulated, or was it regulated from the very start, stemming from brutal consequences, champion progressive policies? No, the freedom of speech has been more regulated recently. You have the ruling, I think in 1919 or 1917 by the Supreme Court that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because you create a danger, but you actually can yell it in a crowded theater if it's on fire. You can't create a dangerous situation out of nothing, and you cannot incite violence against people that could lead to them being killed. Friendly history. Which ancient civilization would stand the best chance against fighting modern drones? Oh, that's a good question. The testudo of the Romans, their ballistas, the Romans would be pretty good at it. The phalanx would be interesting, but I don't know but I think they would have been just crushed by torpedoes. No, freedom of expression is you can give any opinion you want as long as you do it in a respectful way. No. That's dumb. Sorry. You should be allowed to insult. And you should be allowed to say something you should be allowed. And that standard is so slippery because it's like just me saying that's dumb could be seen as me being disrespectful. Plus, if Britain was really this hellhole that arrests people for whatever they say against the government, Nigel Farage would be in prison, Kemeny would be in prison. The UK has arrested more people for free speech violations than any other country in the world. The United States arrested 50 people. The British have 1,700 people they've arrested in the last year for violations of free speech laws or hate speech laws. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense, and it's always been nonsense. I'm sorry. There's one political idea I do speak about, and that's the freedom of speech. The ability to speak your mind is so important because I don't want to be because I talk about stuff, and some of the things I say are controversial because they are so heavy, if you will. They are complex. So saying colonization isn't always bad. That's a big hot take nowadays. Saying that that fascism is left-wing is controversial. There are so many things I say that are controversial. Saying that we're going to have war no matter what, and that means dead children no matter what. That's really controversial, and that really rubs people the wrong way, unless they think about what I say in context and understand it. What is respectful or disrespectful? Who gets to determine that is the ultimate goal. This is why we got away from you. No offense. This is why the Americans didn't want to be British anymore. The basic idea is that we don't want anyone else to determine what we think is this free reign. For the American founders, their basic idea was God gives us our rights. They are, just because we are human, we have these rights. And it really isn't up to kings or parliaments to tell us anything. How did the Treaty of Tordesillas come about? Basically, instead of causing a huge war between Spain and Portugal, the Pope decided to divide colonization efforts between East and West. I mean, it's stupid. People love to talk about knife crime, for example. Yes, Britain has a problem with knife per capita. America has more knife crimes. That's not true, by the way. I mean, it might be true in real numbers because Britain is so much smaller than the United States and so few people want to live there anymore, but yeah. What is your position on James K's? I mean, I love Britain. I love England. I would rather live there. Not rather live there, but if I didn't live in the U.S., I would live in Great Britain. But I'm just not going to take this overly, everything the UK does is great and everything the Americans do is wrong, or I have to run down the Americans so that the British look better idea. What is your position on James K. Polk's presidency? Can you give the evidence to back up the credibility and thought in your view? James K. Polk is one of the most underrated presidents in American history. He made several campaign promises, and he achieved every single one of them, including getting more land of Texas, all of the American Southwest, California, and the Northwest. He drew the line between Canada and the United States. He served only one term, and in one term he did more than most presidents do in two. So why don't we talk about American problems with knives, but we don't talk about Britain's problem with knives? We can talk about America's problems with knives. Explain the historical mishaps of the birth of integration when previously there was a cohesive economic base in the minority communities. Huh? I don't know what you mean by that. Can you talk about the Spanish campaign to control the Canary Isles? Don't know enough about it. The whole idea that Britain is a hellhole is complete nonsense made up by the press and the right. I love how you're complaining about the press, and yet all of your arguments are literally from the press. And yes, I include all of the press when I say that. Yeah. No one I mean, I literally hear Brits telling me that's not true and things are really bad, Harry. So I don't know what you say to your own countrymen who think differently, but yeah. As long as you do it in a respectful way, and what if I'm not respectful? You would create laws to compel my speech? Well, that's not socialism, that's statism. Why doesn't Mona Lisa have eyebrows and eyelashes? I don't know. I think he'd prefer it that way. I prefer it that way. Just thinking of her with a unibrow is off-putting. What's her name, who got famous for being arrested? She said we should burn down the migrant hotels with them all in it. That includes children, women, and men. She should be arrested. Well, that's obviously an incitement to violence. So I would agree with you there. I just don't think that there's anything necessary. I just think people should be able to say things that are rude. Because sometimes a rude delivery is the best way to deliver something. You get a point across you couldn't get otherwise. What if a November uprising? What's the November uprising again? How did the UK get cucked by Muslims? I don't know. Ask Harry. He's the Brit. He's the resident Brit. Why was being neutral so important for Thomas Jefferson when siding with one side would have ameliorated trade relations, tensions, speeding up the process of economic prosperity? Jefferson had been sympathetic to the French, but when he saw what the French Revolution really turned into and then he saw Napoleon, he kind of turned away from it. In his mind, America shouldn't be worried about the mercantile interests of New England anyways, so who cares about what it does to shipping if we put in the Embargo Act? And it was an absolute disaster. The ideas of the founding fathers came from the British thinkers like Locke. Yes, it's a synthesis of Greek, Roman, and British thought. What is the obsession with Muslims causing problems in the UK? My God. I don't know. Ask your own countrymen. Keir Starmer is awful. He is arresting people for their free speech. A majority of it has nothing to do with a law. America and UK are bad countries. They have plenty of problems. Examples. Wahhabism spread by the sword in historic Palestine versus colonial Israel and justified imperialism against the savage Arabs. Your views are superficial and you need to read more. No, you just don't like my views. Maybe your views are superficial and you're wrong. I mean, I'm also waiting for Muslims to tell me, Ahmed, since you probably are a Muslim, I'm wondering when was Mecca made? When did they actually build Mecca? Because there's no evidence for it in the 7th century. What about the woman who sent a video of her farting to a love rival? Offensive, maybe, but not court-worthy. She went to court for that? I mean, she's obviously awful, but sometimes people should be allowed to be awful and not be arrested for being awful. I mean, we're at 2 hours and 30 minutes. We've got like 5 minutes, or 2 hours and 10 minutes. We got like 5 minutes left. Why does my father think the Soviet Union would steamroll modern USA with ease and thinks Poland is stolen German land when Prussia was the land from Poland? I don't think the Soviet Union would steamroll the modern America with ease, but an American invasion of the Soviet Union would be very, very difficult. Is there a requirement that only certain blood types have been chosen in history to be president? No. Does the history of expansionism debunk the fact that America was ever isolationist? I don't see those things as isolationist. I see those things as conquest and settlement. It's not. Isolationism has much more to do with, are you getting involved with foreign countries? And the Native Americans were foreign in many ways, but they were not foreign countries. They didn't have an established society. They were far more transient than being involved with the Europeans or the Mexicans, for example. Hello, not simplified. Forced multiculturalism and socialist government who allowed Muslim immigrants into our country, which they do not assimilate abuse of social programs and act exactly like they act in their own country. Most people in this country have no clue what's going on in Parliament or anything. I can't believe a turtle painted the Mona Lisa. That was funny. What are your thoughts about that the Renaissance hurt women's rights? Sorry if you talked about that earlier. I don't see that. I see it being kind of a steady point for women. I don't see women gaining. I don't see women losing. But if you look at Catherine de' Medici, some of the greatest European monarchs are clearly Renaissance patrons like Elizabeth I. The Renaissance doesn't hurt women politically. I think it actually elevates them. Another Brit has joined. Great to have you here. Just ignore the grooming gangs, knife crime, the high drug deaths, free speech, and NHS. Why are we talking about this? I mean, I know people want to argue about both sides on this. I mean, I don't believe everything I hear in the news because I don't believe the news. I don't trust it. I think that independent journalism is and citizen journalism is on the rise, and that's actually more trustworthy. When I can go on to X and read a news story that will be in the New York Times in 3 hours, I think that's more speedy. When I can hear a news story that the New York Times won't cover and then it actually turns out to be true, that's more reliable. They're already setting up inquiry into the grooming gangs. Wow, an inquiry. Wow, they're doing great. They arrested a woman for insulting a police officer online. Is that true? I don't know if that's true. Hello, Faraz. The November uprising is when Congress, Poland rebelled from the Russian Empire. It's from 1830 to 1831. Might be wrong. Oh, yeah. Nicholas I wasn't about to let him go. He's too much of an autocrat to let them go. This is the guy who put the Habsburgs back in power after the 1848 revolutions. Let me see. Oh, you're awesome too, Carl. Thank you so much. You're so kind. Hearts, where am I projecting? I'm not projecting about anything. Why are my moderators obsessed with saying bad things about me? Can you tell us about, some about the Opium Wars and Dowager Sushi? So Sushi is the Empress Dowager. She's the mother of the emperor, and when he dies, his young son, Puyi, who's the last Qing emperor, the last real emperor of China, is put in charge, but he's obviously too young. She is horrified at the influence of the West, at the dividing up of Chinese influence by the Europeans and Americans. And so she decides that the best thing to do is to stage a revolt and overthrow the influence of the West, Christianity, and the British economy in her country. She is dealing with the Japanese, British, French, and Americans all form a coalition and basically stomp out the Chinese resistance in what's called the Boxer Rebellion. The Opium Wars were two wars the British had fought earlier in that century to basically try to gain as much influence and control as they could possibly get over China's economic and political system. And they had successfully done it, and I think it's after the second one that they get Hong Kong. Why is France allowed to maintain so much power over their former colonies? Post-colonial relations have basically said the French will continue to export their business, economic, and political expertise to these areas to help them when they're really just helping themselves. It is really weird, but I want to go to prison. I don't know why. Who has better pizza, Chicago or New York? You know, I had a friend who recently went to Chicago, and she said she didn't like it. But that's like deep dish pizza. These are based on Italians. Almost all American food is from another country because of a large number of immigrants in American history. Why does America still hate Cuba? Communism, bogeyman, Cold War, legacy. So friendly history. All the other facts about Polk you don't think have any much importance to judge his presidency rather than ones you listed. I don't think they're facts. Harry, what are you I like how everyone's getting up on Harry, even Judula, who doesn't like the Brits. What is going to happen with the Iran thing now that some things have changed? I don't know. I'm not going to say. If you want me to really talk about it, give a super chat. And Faraz, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just tired of the political talk on the chat. Why is Bill Clinton labeled the creator of neoliberalism when throughout American history, government officials always favor business interests, not implementing the threat of pure socialism or communism? Probably because it's after the Cold War. So friendly history. All the other facts about Polk, I already answered that. Who's Mohammed Amin al-Husseini? I don't know. Boycott X. It's a spy network. A spy network? I have seen the most diversity of opinion and ideas on X. It's not necessarily all true. Some of it's really stupid. But I love that diversity of thought. I'm not a historian. You are. It would be bad for you to have a blind spot in your own field of study. Saying Wahhabism and savage Arabs isn't going to carry you far. I never said savage Arabs. When did I ever say savage Arabs? I never said they were savage. I've never referred to the Arabs as savage. I am saying that the Arabs overthrew the... Okay, let's see if this is right or wrong. Okay, let's just go through this. The Ottomans conquer Mecca and Medina. They go through an entire century of decline in the 19th century. The Arabs are sick of them. They actually make a revolt, and the flag is the flag of the Palestinians to this day. That green, red, and white flag is the Arab revolt flag of 1916. The British influenced this revolution, promising them land, part of it including Palestine, if they will overthrow the Ottomans in the area. The Ottoman Empire is already falling apart. They've just committed a genocide that killed about 1.5 to 2 million Armenians and Christians and Assyrians. They are continually assaulted in the Transcaucasus by the Russian army, and they are bewildered. So the Ottomans basically totally collapse. The British screw them over and say, well, actually, you don't get this land. We will mandate this land and determine who gets it. And in the midst of this, in 1917, Arthur Balfour sets out a declaration that says that the Jews who live in the region have a right to their own state in the region. This creates the Mandate of Palestine, which the British eventually tried to divide between Arab and Jew, the same way they divided Pakistan and India between Muslim and Hindu. What have I said? Did I ever use the word savage in that description? I have done this description of that revolt so many times. T.E. Lawrence and the others fought bravely alongside the Arabs and encouraged them to get their own state, and eventually the Sauds are the family that is successful in impressing the British to create a post-colonial relationship bent on oil, and eventually Saudi Arabia becomes a country, 1932. Ibn Saud. Is there anything unfactual about that? I'm going to catch up to the chat and then wrap this up. I saw the video. A young lady said that the cop looked like her lesbian nan, and the cops were on her porch later for it. And you believed everything she said, Obscure? The UK has a lot of problems. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying this whole idea that it's a bad place will get you arrested for saying anything or doing nothing. Why are there more people being arrested in Great Britain for free speech and hate speech violations than in any other country in the world? It's not even close. It's not even close. Well, everybody has an agenda. Don't be mad at Harry for having his agenda. He's a nationalist. He has every right to be a nationalist. That doesn't mean that everything that Britain is doing right now is good. I'm a nationalist, but I don't think everything America is doing is good. I'm just not a national socialist. Why do you think it's stupid to make Iran a U.S. state, but yet Kingdom of Hawaii became a state? That's actually a good question. The Kingdom of Hawaii is a lot closer. Hawaii is not surrounded by a bunch of other countries, and the U.S. just basically stole it. Like, watch one of the recent videos I made. The U.S. had no business going into Hawaii. Sanford Dole just screwed over the Hawaiian people. Yes, I'm from UK. People have been arrested. Boycott X is a spy network. Okay. We got Hong Kong Island and the peninsula after number 1, and then we got the new territories number 2. That's true. Friendly history. If you think about it, all communication is a projection of the self onto the world around you. Yeah, but that's like that universalism thing where it's like, well, we're all racist to one extent or another. No, there's these categories for a reason. Would you like United States of America to become United States of Earth? I'm not going to say. I don't think so. Ireland and my ancestors' country of Scotland is getting worse and worse. It's bad. I love both. I love these countries. They're beautiful countries. I'd love to live in Scotland. So history is the story of how humanity became horrid and is an embellished account of the victors that became victors out of brutality, the same way men have dominated women. Feminism has entered the chat. That's an oversimplification. History is the story of how humans have related to each other and worked together for good and for bad, men and women, with and against each other for all of human history. I do subscribe to the notion that a lot of the things that have happened in history have happened because of women, but that's not women's fault. That men seeking to impress or dominate women or help women have done certain things throughout history. The Christian pilgrims, we talked about the Crusades earlier. Most of them were women who were being assaulted by the Muslims. The Christians decided to put a stop to that for the sake of women. So history is full of men and women interacting together and doing things together, and sometimes that involves manipulation and taking advantage of other people, and sometimes it doesn't. You'd be shocked to learn that Elizabeth I wasn't distrusted because she was a woman. She was distrusted because she wasn't Protestant enough for some people, and they just used her womanhood as a way to mock her. Let me see. UK gave English language to the US. That's true. What's the best history book you've ever read, and what did you like about it? Richard Pipe's Concise History of the Russian Revolution. Excellent, excellent way to understand the Russian Revolution in a simple manner. If you could choose an alternate, and it's only 400 pages long. His actual history is like 1,100. If you could choose an alternative animal for America's national animal and change bald eagle, what animal would you choose? The turkey, like Ben Franklin wanted. So it isn't a fact that James Polk sold and bought slaves as an active president. I'm pretty sure that happened. Yeah, he was a slave owner. So every single president between Washington and Lincoln owned slaves at one point or another, except the Adamses. And yeah, even Van Buren had slaves. I think Van Buren had slaves. Harrison had slaves, or yeah, I think he did. It's really only 2 or 3 presidents, maybe 4 at most, between Washington and Lincoln that don't own slaves. I'm playing Poland in 1936. Can I beat Germany if I prepare for 1939? Yes, you can prepare. Please prepare. Some dude called me fat yesterday. If I were in Britain, could I have him arrested? Probably not. Lawrence of Arabia set it up type. Okay then. I never said Wahhabism is a interpretation of Islam. For goodness sakes. How far back in history do you get to go to claim a region is rightfully yours? What made it rightfully yours? Being there first? Well, just made you a sitting duck, didn't it? I don't know why you're being so aggressive in your language, but basically, I've never made that claim that just because a country had a historical claim to a land, that it means it deserves to have it now. That's a geopolitical argument. You're mixing geopolitics and history. I can tell you the history, but I'm not going to tell you. But the geopolitics I should stay away from because everybody wants to talk about it constantly. Okay, what about this question? Do you consider the following countries to be in the Middle East or not? Pakistan, Armenia, Turkey, Egypt, Morocco, Tajikistan. Turkey, no, yes. Egypt, yes. Everyone else, no. Armenia is not Middle Eastern. I don't think of the Middle East, I think of Armenia. Turkey isn't really Middle Eastern either. Hello, we need your banking information for the 7,000. Thank you for your support. Shalom. Yeah, because I'm funded by AIPAC. In summary, Western Europe caused all the problems in the world for the last 500 years. That's not true. It's not even close to true. They caused a lot of them, but that's really incidental. Yeah. The UK has a bad government right now. Okay, can people stop talking about the UK's government? What year was oil found, and which country first discovered it? I'm trying to think. I mean, the Americans discovered it in Pennsylvania in the 1870s, but it's available before then. Nationalism is like racism or sexism. It's one of those things where it's from the Middle East, it's from the Eastern countries, and they had access to it, but it's really overly utilized by the Europeans. The Faber Ted guy not arrested for daring to say how many genders? Huh? I don't know what you mean. Nationalism is like racism or sexism. You separate people into us and them, then treat people with different standards accordingly. No, I don't buy that. I don't buy the inherent idea that humans are all united. I believe that humans have good and evil in them, and I believe humans have a desire to separate themselves just by their own nature. And I think nationalism is one of the easiest and clearest ways to do that, and probably one of the least harmful ways to do that, because loving your country and loving your identity as a nation is not the same as hating someone else because they are different. Thinking that you're superior in your nation is not necessarily a bad thing. We have been, and not all, and it's only a bad thing if all cultures and societies are equal. And by the way, I know enough about history to know this. They are not. You can love a culture and hate some of the things it does. Let me see. Fun fact, the fleet sent to the Falklands as a flotilla was double the size of how many ships, not Coastal Guard ships, the British have now. Not surprising. Will you be making homosexual hand party again this evening like yesterday planned? Yes. Yes, I will see you and your dad and your brother there. I never spoke about presidents being slave owners. I very clearly was talking about an active president who bought and sold slaves. Nothing to do with presidents that were... I don't know... Oh, for Pete's sake. The disingenuous nonsense from you again. Who bought and sold slaves. Nothing to do with presidents that were slave owners. Polk wasn't the only president who was a slave owner, and he wasn't the only president who owned slaves. I'm not being disingenuous by referring to the fact that he owned slaves, because that's what you were talking about. I'm not being willfully ignorant that he bought and sold... Well, he bought and sold slaves while he was president. Well, that's bad. That's not a good thing. Yes, buying and selling slaves before or during your presidency is bad. Okay. I have to wrap this up. Hopefully you can hear me now. But so what I was going to wrap it up, but basically all I was going to say, I'm just going to leave this for Harsh here. The fact of the matter is, it's not disingenuous for me to focus on the slave thing, him owning slaves. Yes, he bought and sold slaves during his presidency. He is not the only U.S. president to do that, and that is bad. Okay, what does that prove? It doesn't prove anything. Okay, it doesn't make him a worse president. It makes him worse morally, but it doesn't make him a bad president necessarily. Presidents do bad things personally when they are president. Look at Bill Clinton. Does that take away from Bill Clinton's political accomplishments? Sometimes, mainly because it poured into his presidency and became a scandal. But presidents do stuff during his presidency. I know what you're talking about. You're just screaming over and over again and refusing to listen to me. And as a moderator, it is extremely frustrating to have somebody do that when they're actually supposed to be the first person to listen to me. There is nothing wrong with James K. Polk being president and getting things done. He's a good president. It's pretty obvious. Him buying and owning slaves during his presidency is not good. And as for somebody who said that I'm justifying nationalism, I'm saying that nationalism is different than racism and sexism. I did acknowledge the facts. The facts don't change my point. And that's where I have to leave it today. Unfortunately, everybody wanted to fight with me today instead of actually ask questions about history and social studies. So that's unfortunate that it went that way. But we went 15 minutes over just to answer everybody's questions. So we're now at almost at 2.5 hours that we've been going. So that's pretty impressive, I guess. Yeah. Okay. You will tell me your argument and I will disagree with it probably. So I'm going to wrap this up. Please like and subscribe on your way out. Thank you for all your support here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. I will be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk about Martin Luther King's life and legacy with a Q&A to follow for members only, so please consider becoming a member. It'd be really, really nice to have you. That members live Q&A is at 8 o'clock for those who don't want to talk to me about, don't want to hear about Martin Luther King. Nationalism can be bad. I don't think nationalism is necessarily bad right off the top. It can be, but it's not it's not necessarily bad. So anyways, take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your evenings, 6:30 over here. So, all right, I will see you next time, and have a good night. Bye-bye. Oh, and love history.